Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Soul Chess in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 161, The Return of Chiba Nagisa. Early the next morning. Ashford Academy. Lelouch and Momo got up and had their breakfast with the rest of the members of Squad 10 assigned to their current location. After downing their MREs, and Lelouch sent his subordinates to do their business and assignments for the day, sending some to wait with Kyokaku and Isane to help out where the SAZ would take place. He only then explained to Momo about what was going on. He didn't go into as much detail as he had with some others. Information was on a need-to-know basis, not to mention a lot of the stuff she had already seen for herself. At the end of it, Lelouch said to her, "And well, you know the rest already, for the most part." Momo was silent. Her expression made it look like she was trying to process everything Lelouch had just told her. The SAZ and Zero Requiem were especially difficult parts to process. Momo had said that she would stick by Lelouch and she wanted to adhere to her statement, but she hadn't expected something this dark. Lelouch decided to break the tense silence. "I can understand if you no longer want to look up to me. What I did was inexcusable, no matter how much I may try to justify it. I can understand if you never want to be seen with me again." In fact, Lelouch turned to leave. Maybe I should go now. However, he hadn't taken more than a single step before something tugged at his sleeve. He turned his head back to see that Momo had grabbed hold of it. He didn't move and just looked at her, waiting for her to say something. "It may not be excusable," Momo said, her voice so soft in volume, Lelouch barely heard her, but, she paused for a moment. "You've worked so hard to make up for it." Tabayam sometimes asked me, after the incident with Muramasa, what if he isn't worth looking up to, Momo? What will you do if he turns out to be just like Aizen? I have to be honest with you. I won't be like Shapenii-senpai and tell you that you've suffered enough and that I feel really sorry for you, because what you just told me made you sound like a monster." Momo looked at Lelouch. Her eyes reflected feelings of hurt, distress, and a slight bit of anger. "But I know Sensei isn't a monster. That's why Sensei has worked so hard to make up for it all. You yourself know it was wrong, but at the time you couldn't think of what else to do. The person you are now isn't the same person you just told me about. You've let me see who you are in the dark. In the Phantoms I was the one always doing my best to emulate you because I believed in you. I believed in what you were teaching me, what you were teaching all of us. So while I think you've done really terrible things, I know that you're a good person deep down. You're not like Aizen. You want to make the world a great place for all to live in. You're not selfish. You've been so good to me, to Shapenii-senpai, to Homura Teiko, to everyone. The Aizen I liked never existed, but Lamperouge-sensei I always knew existed, has a scar carved deeper into his heart than I can reach." Momo finally let go of Lelouch's sleeve. She smiled. "I'm glad you finally told me what it was that made you who you are. Now I can believe in Sensei without any doubts clouding my mind." Lelouch was taken aback. He wasn't sure what to say to this as he just stared at Momo, eyes trembling. He stared at her sweet smile as she held her hands behind her back. Momo continued to smile. "I'm not a naive girl anymore that sees the world in such black and white. I'm a fully grown adult with a complex understanding of right and wrong, and while some of the things you did weren't right, you admit your mistake and have tried to correct it. I know, because you told us who Zero was when we joined the Phantoms. From that alone, I know you aren't the same person." Momo, Lelouch's small smile and serene expression was a sign that he was comforted by her words. "I'm glad I picked you to be my apprentice. You have understood in only a few hours what has taken me years to see for myself." Momo's cheeks turned red a little. Lelouch turned around and looked up at the rising sun. "When I am no longer here, whether I die in combat or for some reason or another I can no longer pursue my ideals, my legacy, the legacy of Zero, will be yours to carry on. Even if Susanna and I finally have children," Lelouch looked straight ahead, "I want my successor to be you and you alone." "But, why? Why even then?" "Because, you understand the true meaning of the word apprentice. An apprentice does not blindly follow his or her teacher out of blind faith. An apprentice takes his or her teacher's words and makes their own decision about what he or she believes is right. They pursue their teacher's ideals with their own methods. That's something you now understand and why the legacy of Zero should be passed to no one else, but you. Then, Momo walked up to stand next to Lelouch. When that time comes, I will do that. If you have that much faith in me, when that time comes, if that time comes, I will carry out your will. Thank you, Lelouch said and put his arm around Momo and stroked her shoulder as they watched the sun ascend above the trees in the distance as the students begin to file onto campus behind them. I couldn't ask for more from you and it makes me happy. He wasn't sure if it was happiness he was actually feeling. The feeling was one he did not feel often. He nodded. Yes, it makes me feel happy that I have someone like you at my side to believe in me. Lelouch turned to face Momo and ruffled her hair gently. He put his arm down and spoke again. I'll be going out west to where the SAZ is to take place. Carry out your duties as you see fit for now, but when the time approaches closer, please be there to help with the chaos that will no doubt ensue. You can count on me, Momo said with strong eyes and a smile. Good, I'm glad, Lelouch said and then used Shunpo to take off. A few days later. Hideout of the Black Knights. Ogai was waxing the Gurren on Colin's behalf and then figured he would sit down to lunch when he was done. Inu was playing security guard in front of the camera system. Tamaki, Kent, and Yoshida were out being goofballs during this lull of action, so right now things were about as busy as a prosecutor's office between the holidays and New Year's. However, that was about to change. As Inu eyed the monitors, she noticed the oncoming approach of 4 individuals. They stood outside the garage that housed the Black Knights hideout. Huh. She focused the camera and turned on the microphone and PA system to communicate. Halt. This is a private sector. State your purpose. One of the individuals, a man with liver spots, white hair, and a wide girth, spoke into the door. We are the 4 Holy Swords. We wish to speak with the Black Knights. We were told by Kyoto that this was their location. But, I thought the 4 Holy Swords weren't authorized, or rather I wasn't allowed to speak with them. When did that change? Maybe our groups aren't linked, so maybe that's why. Hey. Are you listening? Sorry, what? Inu had spaced out again. The member wearing glasses spoke up again. Are you going to let us in? This is important. Z0 isn't here right now, though. That's fine, may we speak with your second in command? The only girl of the 4 Holy Swords asked. That's Ogai-kun, sure. I'm sure we could inform Zero once we've had a chance to talk. Please, come in. Inu unlocked the door, which made an audible clicking sound to indicate the undoing of the locking mechanism. The 4 Holy Swords wandered down a narrow corridor to where Inu met them at the edge of a T-intersection. Follow me, she instructed. She led them to where Ogai had finally sat down to have his lunch. She stood behind him. Excuse me. For reasons unknown to Inu he panicked. No. He exclaimed, closing his lunchbox shut, these aren't what you think. Inu was confused, but shook it off. Ogai's personal issues were not her business. We have visitors, she said bluntly. Ogai was now focused on the 4 people standing behind him that were just now registering in his optical nerves. They also have an introduction from Kyoto, Inu told him. All 4 of them bowed towards Ogai and Inu out of respect. Ogai leapt to his feet, still holding his lunchbox with one hand. You're the 4 Holy Swords. He bowed out of respect. I'll get straight to the point, the older man, Senbei Ryoga, said to Ogai, we've come here today to ask you for your help. Ogai moved up from his bowed position to register this information. He was stunned that the 4 Holy Swords could need the help of the Black Knights. How do you mean? Ryoga's face became even more serious. Lieutenant Colonel Todo has been apprehended. He sacrificed himself so that we could escape. I see, tell me Mo. Inu cut him off, does it matter what happened? The sooner we contact Zero the sooner we can help him escape. Her bluntness and disregard for the details came from her fiancé's blatant disregard for needing to know the hows and whys of an incident rubbing off on her. All that matters are what happened and how we're going to go about fixing it. Besides, the past is unimportant to Zero. You've given us enough detail. You really think he'll help only with that information? Nagisa asked, most concerned for Todo's safety. Inu gave a thumbs up and a sly smirk. I know he'll help. I'll make the call, then. Inu, can you round up the others and let them know the 4 holy swords are here? Can do, Inu nodded. She returned to the communications room to begin rallying the group. Ogai had been careful in his wording. He wasn't sure Zero was ready to charge in on a rescue OP, but he knew that, at the very least, the rest of the Black Knights should have the opportunity to meet the 4 holy swords. He dialed for Zero's number that Zero had given the group for emergencies only. Zero picked up after 5 rings. Hello. Zero, it's Ogai. We've got a bit of a situation down here. What kind of a situation? Zero asked with growing, calm curiosity. The 4 holy swords just showed up. Inu let them in. Apparently Lieutenant Colonel Todo has been jailed and they need our help rescuing him. Zero was quiet on the other end for a little while. I see. We'll help them. It was as Inu had said. Zero didn't need more information than that to make his decision. You sure? Ogai however knew the dangers of going that deep into enemy territory. He himself was a little hesitant and wanted to make sure his leader knew what he was doing and understood the gravity of the situation. The Black Knights fight for the cause of justice. There's nothing odd about that. Ogai smiled. Although hesitant, he was happy to know Zero was willing to do this because Ogai agreed that helping Todo was justice. He tapped the tips his index and thumb together and extended his other fingers with his free hand to indicate to the 4 holy swords that Zero would help. The JLF elites became ecstatic by this gesture. Zero then began to explain his plan. We'll use a simply method B13. Take the sectioned Nightmare rays via course 18. You can have Diet Hard handle it. Also alert those who are to rendezvous with us. Zero then hung up. The Kyoto group was right, the Black Knights were our best chance, Shogo was excited. With this, the Lieutenant Colonel will be free in no time, Ryoga smiled as he folded his arms. That's assuming he'll show up in person. Rumor has it he sometimes directs operations from the shadows, Nagisa added. That's not Zero's style at all, Inu said, having overheard that statement. Oh, you again, Shoga said, taking note of the blue-haired woman's entrance into the convoy. Inu, how'd it go? Ogai asked her. Within expectations and necessities. How did things go with Zero? From what I just heard, I assume we have the green light. Yup. I don't mean to butt in, but what did you mean by not Zero's style, miss? Nagisa looked at her. Inu Naomi. Inu introduced bowing, Zero wouldn't direct from just the shadows. He may lurk back, but he is always on the battlefield. He has a motto, if the king does not go into battle his men will not follow. Ogai nodded, yeah that's Zero for you. He'll be here. Count on it. Until then, feel free to walk about the facility, Inu gestured to the convoy, you are our esteemed guests here. Please make yourselves at home. Nagisa bowed rather low to Inu. Arigato gozaimasu, Inu-san. And Nagisa, Ryoga was rather taken aback by Nagisa's low bow. Her eye level was at Inu's stomach. It was easy to understand Nagisa's formal bow if one understood her past. On the day the attacks started she and her partner, Kurosaki Ichigo, were on a case together. After the attacks started, Ichigo got this glint in his eye and took off. Nagisa ran after him, but she lost him completely. It was the last she ever saw of her partner. From there, she found herself caught between a rock and a hard place as Brighton Neon soldiers began coming after her. Nagisa returned fire with her stun gun and pistol. She was lucky she had encountered only enlisted privates who had little to no formal training compared to her. Despite wearing less armor and being a cop not a soldier, she managed to maintain a personal advantage. She managed to flee and get away, trying to find somewhere she could take refuge. During the war she found herself completely on her own, not having the transportation or desire to go anywhere near Tokyo to hide. She wanted to fight. She entered a weapons store she knew existed in town and raided it for all it was worth. She may as well have been firing spitwads at the nightmare frames, but she was able to pick off a few soldiers and dodge the slash Harkins that came her way. Her police-issue bulletproof vest also helped her stay alive, and the pilots and soldiers had to have crappy aim, or she just had to have good luck because none of the shots hit her head, though some came dangerously close. However, her luck finally ran out and she wound up taking a bullet to the leg. She was nearly shot and killed until a tank rolled up, carrying the Japanese flag, and shot to hell the soldiers she was facing down. The tank was taken out by a nearby Nightmare, but by that time Nagisa had already been rescued by a man who scooped her up onto his back and carried her away. This was Todo Kyoshiro himself. Todo had been going around trying to pick up anyone he could where he heard resistance was going on, but failing. He stayed away from Karakura town. The things he heard there made him believe that the situation did not require his interference. Nagisa found out that she was not alone in trying to fend off Britannia from Mizuho. However, she was the only one who was a trained cop with the guts to take Britannia head-on. Todo asked if she wanted to enlist in the army while she had the opportunity. It was 2 weeks into the war when this meeting happened. The Japanese army was suffering heavy losses all across the nation, with Todo and General Katase as the only officers left in the general area, with Britannia doing a clean sweep. Nagisa gratefully accepted Todo's proposal and was there and helpful during its Tsushima, where Todo performed his miracle and actually drove Britannia off the battlefield. Nagisa's determination, bravery, and loyalty earned her a promotion above the rank and file, and after the war, when the Japanese army became the Japanese Liberation Front, to fight for Japan, Nagisa continued to survive and remain loyal to Todo, supporting him with everything she had, crowned a member of the Four Holy Swords in 2015 ATB. She owed Todo a great deal and the two supported each other in combat. It was Nagisa's hope that she too might find out if her former partner made it out all right. Much like Todo, Ichigo had meant a lot to her, but not as much as he had meant to Inu. "It's nothing, really," Inu told her and then proceeded up the stairs. She had come face to face with the Four Holy Swords, and now that professional business had been taken care of, it was time to move on to personal business. She had to prepare herself to talk to Nagisa without sounding awkward, and the more she tried, the more she kept ruffling her head because she was making things overly complicated or going off on a tangent due to her tendency to daydream, but by close to operation time she still hadn't thought of a good way to talk to Nagisa. So she decided to give it a rest and get ready for the mission. Maybe she'd talk to her when things were less tense so she didn't sound so selfish. After all, Nagisa had a lot more things to worry about, and Inu didn't want to be rude by putting her needs first. While the Four Holy Swords, plus Colin and Zero, would go out and show up the enemy, Inu's job was similar to her job in Narita. As reserve field commander, her job was to supply telecommunication and keep open channels between the members of the Black Knights and Rax Hata, since the scientist would be more focused on her data than anything else. And on top of that, following Zero's detailed instructions, since Inu was the only one who was able to at least grasp the concept, Inu was to hack into a radio tower and send a feed of the ongoing conflict straight to the Brighton Neon Art Center and make them aware of the rescue of Todo. The plan was executed properly. If not for the fact that Kurugi Suzaku had been the pilot of Zero's greatest enemy, the nightmare frame known as the Lancelot, things would have been even better. Todo was rescued and everyone that mattered managed to make it out and retreat from the oncoming rush of an armada of airships sent by Darlton to crush the Black Knights. Things seemed like they would be okay, but well. "Hey, is Zero coming out?" "I don't know. I tried contacting him, but he won't answer." And then, laughter. Dark, creepy, scary laughter emitted from Zero's beret. Ogai couldn't hear it, as he wasn't wearing a headpiece, but Colin could, as she had been trying to get in contact with him. She wrenched it off and ran into the base. "Ah, Colin." Ogai called after her. Colin stood in her room, placing the headpiece down on her desk, listening, Zero cackling like a maniac until he calmed down, and then she heard him close communications, obviously having realized that someone might have been listening. Colin waited outside his room for him to see if he needed her. He eventually did show up. "Zero," she showed concern in her eyes, "are you okay?" "I'm fine, just a little shaken up." "You most certainly are not fine," Colin exclaimed with heavy concern in her eyes. "What the hell was that? All that laughter, please tell me what's wrong." "Crap, she heard me. Perhaps we should talk inside." Zero opened his room and urged Colin in and locked the door behind them. Zero didn't want anyone to hear him. No one else needed to know that he had an episode. He had already guessed Colin, so he'd have to play things crafty. Inside, the two stood face to face with Zero's cape wrapped tightly around his body. Zero looked at Colin's face. Why is she looking at me like that? Zero wondered with scowling concern and bewilderment. She's looking at me with such eyes, as if I'm... Zero's thoughts stopped swirling about when Colin put her arms around him, catching him off guard. I don't know what I can say. I don't know what's troubling you. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but... Colin let go and looked at Zero dead in the eye as she fanned her fingers across her breast. I support you. If you're hurting inside, you can tell me. I won't tell any of the other members. If Colin had been speaking to the modern-day Zero, this would have seemed very heartwarming, but the current Zero was cold and trusted no one. Despite Colin's very heartfelt words, he did not react, nor accept her offer. He believed his recovery to be manageable on his own. It's all right, Colin. I'll be fine. I'm grateful for your support, but it's nothing for you to worry about. But Colin hated it when Zero remained so professional. Why couldn't he accept her or take her to his side, let her see his face and let her inside? She believed Inu was right about Zero being human inside, but his distance to the others kept them from properly believing in that he was anything more than a man in a costume. However, Colin wanted to see the man behind the costume, the man intending on leading them all to victory. It was apparently clear, Colin was in love with Zero. Colin, I am the king, the most important piece on the board. You are the queen, the most powerful piece. In war and strife, one must keep a cold bed to prevent becoming too emotionally attached to another to avoid making a mistake. That's all I am to you, just another piece on the board. That is not what I said, Zero spoke sternly. You are an ally that I cannot sacrifice, an ally I require. I am grateful for your concern, but it is wasted. I am all right. If I needed comfort, I would tell you. One must learn to control their impulses and think of it as a reward to preserve for later. Reward? Colin was confused. Zero caressed Colin's cheek. His true feelings towards the redhead were unknown to him, but to secure Colin's loyalty, he intended to milk this reading he was getting from her for all it was worth. If you desire me to come inside where no one has dared, you must be patient. Support me and assist me, and in the end, once our objectives are completed, and nothing stands in the way, you may have what you desire. But what about you? Don't you need someone to comfort you when? Colin, Zero spoke her name a little louder and rather authoritatively, we are soldiers and warriors. Our job is to fight. I am made of sterner stuff than this. My hinges have been tightened. I apologize for worrying you. I'm going to be just fine. Your concern is welcomed, but not necessary. I understand, Colin said. She looked towards the door and prepared to leave. Zero, lead us to victory. Of course, Zero told her calmly, and then Colin left the room. Colin and Zero's discussion was not the only one that occurred that evening. As she intended, Inu was finally able to speak with Nagisa one-on-one. She had introduced herself to Todo, formally, and bowed incredibly low out of respect. After letting Nagisa make sure he was alright and giving her target some space, Inu made her approach. Chiba-chan, she said, approaching Nagisa from the right as Todo walked away from her, can we talk, just us? Sure, I guess. Nagisa blinked confusedly. She had no idea what this woman possibly needed to discuss with her that was so private, but Nagisa was too honorable to refuse such an earnest request from an ally. Inu and Nagisa met in the blue-haired field commander's bedroom as it was the only available private space. Chiba-chan, you used to work in the Mizuho precinct, right? Nagisa blinked, in shock this time. She could have sworn she had never met Inu in her life, and her full name was rather common. How Inu latched onto her was beyond the former cop's grasp of comprehension. Jigomin, I was talking to the Kyoto group. I've been looking for someone. They said you might know his whereabouts. I'll do what I can, Nagisa spoke professionally, sitting upright in her seat, legs crossed, hands folded over her knee. Who are you looking for? The tone in Inu's voice shifted from simple inquiry to one of dreariness. He was your former partner at the precinct, Kurosaki Ichigo, Inu brought her hand up by her chest and gripped tightly at the cloth. The light from the light bulb reflected off her engagement ring. My fiancé. Hearing the name, shocked and excited, Nagisa got up, stepped forward briskly and clasped her hands tightly around Inu's shoulders, staring at her with fervent encouragement and hope. She was crouching little in order to be at Inu's eye level. You've seen him, when? Inu gasped, eyes trembling. She had been hoping it was Nagisa who had seen Ichigo. You've been looking for him too. Inu's voice sounded crushed. Nagisa, understanding what the question meant, let her arms fall to her sides and slumped her head forward in despair. I haven't seen him since the summer, 7 years ago. Feeling that fate had kindled a fire in her soul only to snuff it out so harshly, the hand clutching to Inu's chest balled into a fist and she began to get teary-eyed and started sniffling. Nagisa looked up. Hey, what's the matter? You make it sound like you haven't seen him after the war. She couldn't understand what had Inu so upset. I haven't, Inu sobbed. Nagisa was caught off guard. She hadn't expected that answer at all. Ichigo had told her nothing about his past. Her initial rush towards Inu was on the chance that Ichigo had met someone after he had parted ways with Nagisa, but the awful truth was the reality that she had never stood a chance with him in the first place and that even his fiancé hadn't seen him in the same 7-year time span. She had heard neither hide nor hair of him for as well. Nagisa looked over at the side wall, wondering if there was something she could say or do. Do you want me to make some tea? Nagisa asked calmly. Ichigo never told me anything about his friends or family. If it's not too much to ask, could you tell me about him? I've been worried about him. Inu nodded, trying to keep herself from crying. Nagisa prepared some warm traditional Japanese tea while Inu dried her eyes with a tissue. When the tea was finally prepared, Inu and Nagisa sat down with it in their chairs a comfortable distance apart from each other in the field commander's room. Nagisa spoke first with Inu still looking like she was going to break out into tears at any moment. The tea had calmed her down a little, but her expression made her look like a sad puppy. How long have you known him? 17 years. He proposed to me during the war. Even her voice was like that of a sad puppy. Did he fight? Nagisa asked. Inu nodded. You did too then, right? Inu became a little less depressed as she answered, indicated by the fact that she was no longer staring holes into her tea, but now is looking directly at Nagisa. Well yeah. What unit were you two in? Nagisa asked, cutting her off. Huh. I mean, you guys were part of the Japanese army, weren't you? Nagisa couldn't understand Inu's confusion. Orium didn't know much about military build. Zero kept the Black Knights mostly disorganized and followed a chain of command that made things easy for him to follow. Naomi-chan. Inu looked down and mumbled. Pardon. Why, me. I still didn't hear you. I said that's not my real name, Inu said lowly, now back to staring at her tea. She took a deep breath and looked all around the room to the locked door and to the air vents. She took another deep breath before ultimately deciding that she felt safe sharing what she was about to say with Nagisa. Inu was a very trusting individual, perhaps naively so, but she wanted to tell Nagisa. As a friend of her fiancé, she felt it was only fair. She leaned forward a little and spoke in a somewhat hushed voice. Chiba-chan, can you keep a secret? I haven't told this to anyone, not to Zero, not to Colin-chan, not to Ogai-kun. No one can know, but as a friend of Ichigo's, please tell me I can trust you with this secret. Nagisa looked at Inu oddly, not knowing what to expect. What? Not even Todo-kun? No one? You have to promise. Inu exclaimed. Nagisa was deeply concerned with what sort of military secret Inu was concealing. She had a few theories, none of them right, as she would soon find out. She thought of what Ichigo might think if he were here right now. From what she knew of him, he'd more than likely want her to make that promise. Nagisa smiled warmly to Inu. I promise. For Ichigo's sake, I promise. She crossed her arm over her chest and placed it over her heart. If I break this promise, may my soul be scarred when I am to be judged for the next world. Orium sighed and then stood up. She put her tea down on the coaster next to the collapsible table next to her. She had a serious look on her face and she spoke very calmly. My real name is Inu Orium. Inu reached into her pocket and pulled out a floral necklace that she then draped around her neck. She cupped her hands around her necklace as it bounced around erratically in front of her. Green flame-shaped light surrounded the pendant part of the necklace while the small space around the necklace glowed with the same orange-yellow light as Orium's Shun Shun Rika. Nagisa marveled at this inexplicable act. I am one of the Karakura 7, Tenshi-san no Neon. Angel of Japan. Tenshi-san. Nagisa's eyes trembled. There was no denying that the glow before her around Inu's necklace was an act unexplainable by science or logic. So what was it? How was she doing it? What were the Karakura 7? The necklace stopped glowing as Orium put her hands down. Unable to fight them any longer, her neck having been tight all the while she had been talking, the blue-haired woman looked at Nagisa with tears. I've lost my power to heal. All I know how to do is hurt. She gripped at the necklace. Because Ichigo's gone and Britannia took him. And now the truth came out to Nagisa. She just stared at Orium in shock, not knowing what to say or how to act. Ichigo dead? Impossible. It had to be. But Ichigo didn't match. He was the one they could not see. But the Night Rays, their fact spheres were able to sense his spiritual energy and Sakuradite can bypass right through our supernatural defenses. My friend and I, Orium sniffed, we tried looking for him, her voice became squeaky and somewhat incomprehensible, but we couldn't find his body or any trace of him, just a large pool of his blood. She hyperventilated a little. Nagisa gripped at the fabric on her leg. Did you consider that Britannia may have captured him? Nagisa grabbed to the only hope she had left. No, but if they couldn't see him. Yes, that's a good point. There was a long awkward silence. Inu broke it with a tearful, if but forceful tone. I don't think he's dead. I refuse to believe he's dead. When Ichigo proposed to me, he told me that he would come back. He told me that no matter what he wouldn't leave me crying in front of a grave marker. He's been gone for 7 years. Nagisa said, now fighting tears herself as she gripped her humerus and looked to the side in anguish, how can you be so certain? Because he has to be. Ichigo promised. Nagisa heard Orium's frantic declaration and looked her dead in the eyes and saw Orium's desperate hopes to cling to the past. I think he's too ashamed to face the fact that he failed. I know he's out there. He has to be. Chiba-chan. Orium swallowed and squeaked as her hand clenched her necklace incredibly tightly and her face scrunched up considerably, he absolutely has to be. At this juncture in the conversation, when Orium frantically refused to believe that Ichigo could be dead, Tatsuki and Rangiku had been kind to Orium. They knew her. They were her friends. They didn't want to see her plunge into ultimate despair. Nagisa, however, did not have the same reason to let Orium so naively think that Ichigo could possibly be alive. He's not. Nagisa shouted, getting to her feet. Think about it. Ichigo fought to protect everyone. You said you lost your power, yet here you are fighting despite the fact that you don't have it. Maybe I sound stupid because I haven't known him as long as you did. But to me, Ichigo always seemed like the type of man that would never stop fighting failure or no failure. No matter how many cases seemed hopeless, no matter how many times a trail went cold, Ichigo never gave up. He would never and could never give up. Nagisa's fists trembled as she stared at the ground and held her arms at her sides. The anguish in her eyes didn't leave for an instant. She wanted to hit something. All of that searching and wondering only for it to end like this. Was the kind of person you were going to marry the type that would ignore movements of resistance if he knowingly knew they were happening? Orium was struck with reality to her very core. But I saw it in his eyes before he ran off on that fateful day, Nagisa said, reliving the moment. Tension subsided in her face, but she still looked depressed despite recalling a fond memory. The Kurosaki Ichigo I knew was an honorable man and a chivalrous man. The tension returned. Nagisa stomped her foot and clenched her eyes shut. He was not a coward and he would never let anyone he wanted to protect suffer before his eyes. We are all suffering, so if he's out there, where is he? Why isn't he here? Chiba-chan. Orium looked at Nagisa, realizing that she was going through the same grief she was. Nagisa slumped back to sitting down, staring at the floor, hands on her legs. She was back to that tensionless depression. I've always thought that maybe he was with your group or part of a pocket of resistance somewhere. Nagisa looked at Orium and yelled as her eyebrows converged and she balled a fist up by her chest. So if he's not helping to fight for our freedom, where else could he be if he's not dead? I don't know, Orium's eyes dampened. How could he abandon you? How could he abandon us? Why isn't he fighting for us? Where is he? With every question it became harder and harder for Nagisa to fight her tears. After the last one they ultimately started to fall. How could he just die like that? Nagisa pressed her hands to her face and looked at the floor and began to cry uncontrollably. Orium went over to Nagisa and wrapped her arms around her. The older woman had already had her chance to grieve and was just concerned and worried for Ichigo, but here was someone who had not known his ambiguous fate or the fate that he was possibly gone. Nagisa let out her frustration and anger into tears as Orium comforted her. Ichigo had been a treasured friend to Nagisa, much like he was to Tatsuki and much like he was to Rukia. Nagisa had known Ichigo for 4 years and during those 4 years he had been a good friend to her. Although they hadn't shared personal information, never done much other than go to class and studied together, and eventually wound up working together for not even a full year, Nagisa missed Ichigo. Orium soothed Nagisa as she cried as well, missing Ichigo as well. She firmly believed Ichigo was out there. Her hallucination of her fiancé appeared before her. You know I never meant to hurt her, the illusion said with a regretful stare. I know, Orium responded calmly. You know that you have to be strong for her, that you have to help her until you can see me again, the illusion of Ichigo informed her. I know, Orium said, feeling sadder by the minute as her throat muscles tightened up again. I'm out there waiting for you, Orium. Ichigo put his hand on Orium's head. I know, Orium said, now feeling her eyes become wet yet again before she then shouted out in a sob, I know. She hugged tighter to Nagisa and now both of them were holding onto each other and crying. Each one was comforting the other at the unknown, but possibly quite fatal, fate of a great man they both knew. I'll never give up hope. I'll keep looking for you until I find you. I love you with all my heart, Ichigo, Orium thought as she grieved. Outside, the mysterious hooded Soul Reaper lurked nearby. He stared at a pair of blue, floral hairpins he had picked up near Shinjuku and then pocketed them again. He then moved away and headed for another location. End of chapter 161. Chapter 162, The Craftiness of CC, Second Contract. Somewhere in the Pacific. The Black Knights were all aboard a submarine. Many were amazed at how far the Black Knights had come since they first started, especially between Zero's leadership and back before the group was named when Naoto used to lead it. Inu herself commented, as she peered above deck with binoculars, how the group could barely get their hands on a motorcycle sometimes and now had a submarine under their command. Below deck, Zero had everyone gathered round to make a speech and explain some changes that would go on in the Knights. He announced that Todo would now be in charge of military affairs. Diet Hard would be taking charge of intelligence, espionage, and all public relation matters. Nagisa had a problem. Zero, I'm not a racist, but what's your reasoning for putting one of them in such a sensitive position? Reasoning? And what of me, I ask you? A bold statement, with a point. I'm not Japanese either. You all know this. What matters is the ability to produce as results. Who you are and where you're from are of little consequence. Zero then announced that Ogai would be his deputy commander. Ogai was modest about receiving this position, but agreed to it nonetheless. Zero also declared that Rax Hata would become head of research and development. He then put Colin in charge of what he called the Zero Squad, which would be an elite guard under his direct command. In other words, his personal force. Colin could feel the smile on her face growing and growing. Shogo would be assigned to the first squad. Ryoga was the second squadron leader. Third squad would be a man by the name of Kagesaki Kazuna. Fourth squad commander will be Chiba Nagisa. Shogo gave Nagisa a fond pat on the side of the shoulder as she smiled. Fifth squad commander will be Inu Naomi. Sixth squad commander will be Okazaki Iyakiro, and the seventh squad is under the command of Kuro Kenzaki. Special Forces Division 1 will be under the command of Sugiyama Kent and Tamaki will command the 2nd Division Special Forces. That is all. Tamaki pumped his fists. I'm the man. Colin looked to the left. There's no position for CC. She said softly to herself. The green-haired woman fondled her hair in discomfort as Colin looked in her general direction. It had only been a short time since CC was formally introduced to the rest of the Black Knights. Zero had introduced her as the reason he could be here before the group, that she was his right-hand woman. Everyone looked like they had a lingering question on their lips, such as CC's relationship with Zero. Tamaki, though he didn't say anything, wondered if CC was perhaps Zero's mistress or something and was just along with the ride. Nevertheless, Zero told them to treat CC with the same respect as one would him. Zero, Diet Hard spoke up. May I add something? Zero looked over towards the Brighton Neon. There's one issue that still needs to be dealt with. It concerns Kururu. Perhaps we should hold discussion of sensitive information between elites only, Todo interrupted, having an idea of what Diet Hard was going to say. Todo is right, Zero stated, we'll discuss this when we reach land. Rax Hata, Todo, Ogai, and I will discuss this with you when we reach land. Until then, all forces disperse and go about your daily routines and objectives. Yes, sir. The knights declared in unison. Also, someone relieve Inu of lookout. Yoshida drew a check mark in the air indicating he would take care of it. After being told the news, Inu climbed back down the ladder and handed Yoshida the binoculars. Congratulations, Inu, he told her. Congratulations. Colin had followed Yoshida to see Inu. Zero put you in charge of a squad, Big Blue, isn't that great? Yeah, Inu said, putting on a cheerful front, great. Inside, Inu's inner turmoil made her want to scream like a banshee, but Inu understood that as a squad leader she could command individuals as she saw fit. Yoshida climbed up the ladder and left Inu and Colin talking to each other as other members passed them by. We haven't had much chance to talk lately, Big Blue. It's because you've been spending a lot of time with Zero, Little Red. Colin blushed slightly. Inu giggled. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Zero's a great commander, don't you think? Colin nodded once enthusiastically. There was silence in the air. She then decided to break it with a little small talk. Say, Big Blue, when this is all over, what do you intend to do? I feel like we're slowly heading towards a climax that will make or break the liberation of Japan. Once we do, we won't need to be terrorists anymore. We'll be heroes. Inu smiled, well you know. Colin nodded with a smile. Yeah, you'd probably want to find your fiancé and you could announce it on a live broadcast that you're looking for him. Inu gasped lowly and fantasized of the prospect. She imagined a big parade with lots of confetti and the declaration of victory against Cornelia's forces. Inu and the founders of the Black Knights would all be inside the palace formerly belonging to the Viceroy. Inu would have arranged it with Zero that she would speak over the microphone to find Ichigo. Ichigo, it's me, your fiancé, Orium. Please, if you're out there, Inu would say all teary-eyed, don't leave me alone anymore. Colin noticed a tear trickle from Inu's face. Hey, Big Blue, Colin reached out and rubbed Inu's eye. Inu rubbed her eyes furiously with her sleeve, sorry. It's okay. I know this is hard for you. Colin was surprised when Inu gave her a hug, holding the young girl against her bosom. You make it easier, Little Red. CC watched the spectacle from the corner of the room. Her spiritual power entered Inu's senses. She had been so wrapped up as a Black Knight and had yet to encounter any hollows of any kind that she was surprised to even sense anyone having spiritual power. She tensed unnaturally, momentarily wondering where the riot was coming from. She looked up and looked over to CC's location and slowly let Colin go. It's coming from her. Inu didn't know how to make heads or tails of what was going on in front of her. The only thing she could do was go with her gut and keep Colin out of it. Colin-chan, she stepped around her, looking at CC. I think I'm going to have a chat with CC-san. Okay. I'm going to go have a talk with Zero then, see if field commanders can be part of the Zero squad. Colin dashed off. Inu walked over to Cici, who beckoned her into a secluded area where no one else could hear them speak. 4 walls, ample lighting, an area no bigger than a prison cell. It was a storage closet that simply hadn't been filled yet. The two stood face to face with Inu, not knowing what to say. The piercing gaze from Cici's goldenrod irises was somewhat mystical and foreboding in a way, and Inu couldn't think of a good way to break the ice. Thankfully Cici saved her the trouble. "You're like me, aren't you?" Cici asked, cutting right to the point. Her expression was as unreadable as ever. Huh? Inu was confused. "You can see them, can't you?" "Them? You mean spirits?" Cici nodded. "Is that why you were looking over at me? Do you?" "Inu," Cici interrupted her, "I can sense the power within you, but you've lost the power to utilize it, haven't you?" Inu looked disheartened, grabbing at her shoulder. "Inu, do you know about the power of the king?" "Power of the king? You mean geese?" Cici was thunderstruck. The power of geese was meant to be a secret by all except those who had its power and those who had a code. She wished she had had the foresight to have brought a gun with her. "It's okay. You couldn't have known. Zero couldn't have known either." "I know you know who Zero is, but he doesn't know that I know without him knowing," Inu said to Cici. Cici furrowed her brow and studied Inu. "I see, you know the other him, don't you?" Inu nodded, yes. She then realized what Cici had just said. "Wait, you've seen?" "Yes," Cici said before Inu spout out Zero's identity inadvertently, "just the other day in fact. He was dealing with an old nemesis of his." Inu grabbed Cici's shoulders and shook her, startling her for a moment. "Did he say anything?" "Anything at all." Cici was back to her unreadable, neutral gaze. "I was all business to him. We did not converse much." Inu was disheartened again, shown by the bending of her elbows and the downcast look of her half-lidded eyes towards the floor. "Inu," Cici said with an inquisitive tone, "you've had all this time to expose Zero, why haven't you? Why not from the very beginning? Do you know how this ends? Did he tell you?" "Zero hasn't told me anything." Inu let her hands drop from Cici's shoulders and then made a fiston in front of her chest. "I lost someone very important to me because he didn't tell me." She began talking more intensely and loudly, "That's why I want to follow Zero till the very end. I feel like if I follow him, I'll find the answers." "I see, so you don't know how things are going to go, either." Cici was puzzled for a moment and glanced all around. There were no security cameras inside this closet and the vent was blasting so furiously she was certain no one outside could hear her or Inu, but she pondered her options. Should I take the chance? With her having spiritual power already, there's no telling what kind of side effects this could have. Still, Cici looked at Inu, how robust she was, despite what Cici could see on the inside as a raging whirlpool of mental instability. She closed her eyes for a moment and ultimately decided that what she was about to do, especially given her conversation with Lelich the other day, was the best course of action. "Inu, as a sign of trust that I will not expose you to Zero, and you will not expose him to anyone else, will you form a contract with me?" "What kind of contract?" "The same contract I gave Zero." Inu blinked. "You're the one who," Cici nodded. "Do you think it will help me?" "I don't know. I've never formed a contract with someone who already had spiritual power." Cici knew it would help her though. However, she knew she wanted to form a contract with Inu, so she said, "It might help you find your fiancé." That removed all hesitation from Inu's thought process. "Whatever you need to do then, do it." "Very well." Cici reached out and grabbed Inu's wrist. Her code glowed on her forehead. Inu went blind momentarily as images of Cici fluctuated all about the sensory input of her eyes. "You are about to obtain a very special power, the power of the king. We will form a contract. I hereby grant you the power of geese." Inu and Cici broke off each other as Inu dropped to one knee as her eye throbbed with pain. When she moved it away, there was the geese emblem emblazoned in her eye. It faded a moment later. "The contract has been made. From this point forward, Inu Naomi." "That's not my real name," Inu said, standing up, "to you as well, as a sign of the trust one have put in this contract, I share my true name, Inu Orium. Very well, Inu Orium, from this point forward you have the power of the geese. It is up to you to discover the extent of this ability and what you will do with it. What do I have to do in return? Cece remained silent. I hope you are able to find your fiancé. Cece left the room. Inu hated feeling like she was ignored, but Cece always seemed like she had an air of mystery about her. However, this was one part of the mystery that Orium would have to discover on her own. Ishikawa Prefecture. Having settled matters with the resistance moving against Britannia, apart from the JLF or the Black Knights, Cornelia once again had to lay the matter of arresting the Chinese ambassador to rest, with there being no evidence linking that the Chinese were actually involved, despite Gun Ryu being all over the place. He maintained that he did not support Japan and that the men who attacked were not his to control and that a lot of the Gun Ryu were stolen models. Cornelia pressed further, but as an ambassador, the man did not have to answer her questions, leaving Cornelia frustrated. To make matters worse, Cornelia now sat in her hotel suite arguing with Yuffie about her choice of knight. Discrimination against the numbers is our national policy. Then it's time I tried to change that. Cornelia scowled. Suzaku had saved her life more than once, yes, but she felt knighthood, which would put him on commissioned officer status as major, was just too much. She also wondered if Yuffie had forgotten that it was the Japanese that took Lelich and Nunnally from them. Oh, is it now? She spoke scornfully, Sub-Viceroy. It was the first time Cornelia had ever taken a harsh tone with her sister. Well, when you become Empress, feel free to do so. Cornelia ended the call immediately and raked her fingertips upon her face as she folded down the screen of her laptop. She hadn't meant to be so harsh to her sister, but she was concerned that Yuffie was digging too deep and would soon find herself buried alive, and there would be no way for Cornelia to protect her, not now, not anymore. With Suzaku now as her personal bodyguard, Cornelia's protection was seconded by his. First the hotel jacking, now this. Cornelia was afraid she was slowly losing her ability to protect Yuffie. No, I can't lose hope, I have to. Cornelia looked at her left hand as her fingers twitched and she cupped them as if holding a wine glass. I have to. Cornelia's frustration continued to well up inside her, and all she could feel in her fingertips was her sister slipping away in between the spaces. With an anguished look on her face, Cornelia followed her brain's next impulse and put her face flat against her desk, made a fist with her left hand, outstretched her arm and slammed it on the table. Damn it! Cornelia's frustration, mixed with her stress, was slowly reaching its breaking point. She just wanted Yuffie to be safe, but if she insisted on making bold, naive decisions that made Cornelia do nothing except worry about her younger sister ad nauseum. As she sat at her desk, a hollow sensed her spiritual power and began climbing down the wall towards her room. Thankfully for Cornelia, because the last thing she needed was dealing with something supernatural, one of Nozomi's subordinates had spotted it already and got to it before it even managed to reach the frame. Sensing the spiritual power of Cornelia below, the Soul Reaper left the area immediately and reported things to Nozomi. Nozomi, in turn, reported to Lelich. Yes. Teiko, I just received a report that there's a human in Ishikawa near the Chinese embassy that has vice-captain level spiritual power. That was probably Viceroy Cornelia Lee Britannia. We have it on file back in the Soul Society that she's a Fullbringer. Lelich had watched Cornelia up until her promotion to General-in-Chief. He knew she had Fullbring and he estimated she was probably around vice-captain level by now. I see, what should I do? Nothing, just avoid her. Understood. Nozomi hung up. Lelich was currently sitting at the empty stadium where the SAZ massacre would take place up in the stands. He had been going over the files Kendra had given him of the entire list of rogue Soul Reapers. He was coming across the last one now, Zhang Kyudashi Jaref. Scanning it over, he once again found evidence that contradicted that it could be the Soul Reaper that Lelich had seen. He called Kendra. This is leader of Patrol Corps and Fukotaiko of Division 2, Otomaka Kendra, how may I assist you? Kendra, this is Lelich. Oh, Lamperouge Teiko, how you found who you were looking for? No, and that's why I'm calling. Are you sure this is every Soul Reaper that's gone rogue, every substitute we've had that fits my criteria? That's every last file, Lelich. You've worked with me. You know I'm always on task. Yes, I'm aware. Lelich sighed, remembering his days in Division 2. It can't be any of them though. Preposterous. He'd have to be a dead man for it to be anyone else unless your criteria are too constraining. Check again. Are you questioning my own detective skills? Lelich asked. Kendra apologized, sorry. That was out of line. A very famous fictional detective once said, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains must be the truth. What does that mean? Kendra asked. It means maybe we really are looking for a dead man. Did you ever think maybe your mind is fabricating the whole thing? Kendra asked. Lelich listened intently to what she was suggesting. I've watched the videos the Soul Society has picked up. We've seen neither hide nor hair of a mysterious hooded Soul Reaper. We've had no reports either from any of your subordinates. But that's... Lelich, did you ever think maybe because of the psychological weight this expedition is having on you that you fabricated this ghost as a means of judging you? You can go on and chase dead men if you'd like, but seriously think about that. I'd recommend taking some time off when you get back to clear your head, or maybe even now. Without even missing a second, but too late to cut her off, Lelich spoke out, absolutely not. Kendra was taken aback by his fervor. What's coming up is too important for me to leave now. Thank you, Kendra, I'll remain in touch. Lelich hung up and sighed. As he sat there, Susanna showed up via Shunpo. Lelich Dono. She looked concerned as Lelich turned his head to look at her. Hey, he said with a tired smile. She smiled at him and sat down next to him, putting her head on his shoulder and gripping his hand. I heard about it from Kyokaku-san about what's upcoming. I felt I should be here. Thank you, Lelich told her. Having you at my side will make this easier to watch and far less painful. This was the worst mistake of my life. Suddenly Lelich's pager went off. Hello. Teiko, good, I was hoping you'd pick up. Scouts have reported the oncoming arrival of 3 ships, 2 from Britannia, 1 under the sea. Ayaskawa-kun has been helpful in keeping me updated thus far, but apparently he didn't know anything about this. He said the monitors aren't broadcasting out this far. When you hang up, call Nimue and ask her to shift coordinate radius to cover your location. Lelich hadn't forgotten about Kamen, but he had forgotten to mention to Nimue that the relay needed to be altered in order to broadcast it. It was lucky Shisato had called. What you're about to encounter is a small incident, a battle between the Black Knights and Britannia. Keep your wits about you and be careful. Easy for you to say this place was like Hollow Central when we first got here. I've had to call Hinamari Teiko over here several times already. Yes, I'm aware, and that's why I stationed you there. You're more experienced than Kyokaku, and unlike Rangiku, Susanna, Momo, Isane, and me, you aren't bound by the Gentei Kaijo. I needed you there for your combat capabilities. Keep yourselves hidden and keep doing what you're doing. After Zero leaves the island completely, you can lock onto my location and come here. Understood, sir? And, Teiko. Yes, Shisato. The Black Knights, they are what you based the Phantoms off of, right? Yes, Lelich told her, they were the reason I organized the Phantoms in such a similar fashion, and the reason I had you all trust me rather than trying to find random civilians who had no choice but to follow me. Let's just say that in making the Phantoms, Lelich's gaze became cross. I learned from my mistakes and from what I did with the Black Knights. Why? What happened? Shisato asked curiously. Now is not the time to explain. ETA is less than an hour, I estimate. Within 30 minutes move all your forces to Kamen Island. Yes, sir, understood, sir. I will call back when the crisis has passed. Shisato hung up. Lelich sighed. Royal Dimension. Former captain of Squad 12, and current member of the Royal Guard, Hakai Funkiryo, was going about her own business as she wandered about the grounds. Once again she was sensing a strange presence she felt was foreign to the Royal Dimension. It was coming from the Library of Infinite Knowledge. Kiryo, the lavender-haired woman, looked behind her to see her comrade-in-arms Shudera Senjumaru behind her. You sense it too? She asked. Shudera nodded. Shall we go together? Kirio nodded and the two took a moving platform towards the lowest external level of the royal dimension. They stood on a small balcony the size of a front porch and looked into the dark, gaping maw of the library's entrance. Nodding to each other they entered down the entrance of the dark corridor and soon found themselves alongside rows upon rows of books. Inside a presence shifted back and forth from their senses. Kirio went left, Shudera went right. The meaning behind the name of the Library of Infinite Knowledge was exactly as it sounded. However, it was a dangerous location, for simply reading and soaking in the knowledge of many of these grimoires and books could give the reader the knowledge they needed in order to do or know exactly what was written. And since the library's knowledge was infinite if someone was skulking about in it, for who knew how long, there was no telling what had been read and what they could do. Shudera was the first to find something odd in the library. It was a set of swirling portals exiting out to the world of the living. Kirio. The lavender-haired cook arrived instantly via Shunpo. What is this? Hikaifian marveled at the sight, eyes trembling. It appears to be a portal to the world of the living, a connection to the royal dimension. But who could have possibly gotten in here without an Okin? Who would want to invade besides the obvious? And how did they get directly connected to the library? I don't know, Shudera answered. Are you residents of this world as well? A voice behind the two women alerted them as they turned to come face to face with a woman with long black hair, eyes as blue as a crystal lake, and an orange, very plain-looking, but still rather expensive dress. She had a length of red ribbon tied around her collar and she had an hourglass-shaped figure. She looked to be about 30. Both women became hostile, whipping out their swords. I wouldn't do that if I were you. A green version of the geese emblem appeared in the woman's right eye, forcing both women to their knees, racked with pain as a green aura surrounded them and the perimeter of their irises. Who are you? Shudera demanded to know. My name is Marianne Six Britannia. And you too, a purple version of the geese flashed in her left eye, will not report me to see. Yes, Mistress Marianne, Shudera and Kirio said in monotone unison. Go about your business as though I was never here, Marianne commanded with a playful smile. It then changed to a devilish one. Close off the library to restricted access. Yes, mistress, the two women said in monotone. Thank you. Now go about your business. Both emblems vanished from her eyes. Shudera and Kirio, mind-controlled, were made to do as the Empress pleased. Marianne then picked up the book she had been left lying sideways on top of some others. It was a book of otherworldly transportation. With it, she could reach into the other world and teleport anyone she wished anywhere else in the world within a 500-mile radius of a thought elevator to 10-mile radius to that thought elevator. She stood in front of the portal connected to the thought elevator on Common Island. She began to commune with the living world, controlling it and activating it as she saw fit. Soul King's Keep. Why, Your Majesty? A subject noticed as the Soul King emerged from deep in his underground private quarters. He was in his avatar form that made him bald with blue skin and black eyes with white, starburst pupils. He was wearing a long, purple, and red regal robe like kings used to wear in Arthurian times. He stood out upon his balcony and looked out over his dimension. I sense a disturbance, he uttered and closed his eyes, letting his mind travel, and in an instant his body disappeared at will. Hell. Rita was busy overseeing the cleaning of her tower by her servants whilst she sat in her control chair 50 feet above the floor, overseeing hell at the same time and watching Cornelia, Lelich, Zero and the mysterious hooded Soul Reaper all on different monitors. In other words, a typical day for her. Suddenly, a presence teleported into the room, instantaneously. It was a disembodied head taking the form of an owl skull with flaming eye sockets and green fire all about it. Rita sensed the presence and put her apparatus on sleep mode as she lowered the chair to ground level. She got down on one knee as the skull floated 7 feet off the ground. My liege. The skull spoke telepathically. Rita, you are my second set of eyes and ears. Are you aware of the circumstances surrounding the breach of the living world in yours? Yes, I have. Is there something you wish me to do about it? I did not report it for I believed the Royal Guard was more than capable of handling it. You have ordered me to always observe and never to interfere. Do you have an intervener to prevent an unfavorable outcome? Yes, Your Majesty, Rita answered crisply. Show me, the Soul King ordered. Rita nodded and opened the apparatus again from the floor, allowing the Soul King to observe as the HUDs swirled all about them. Rita grabbed the monitor showing the mysterious hooded Soul Reaper whose presence currently inhabited Common Island. "This is him," she told the Soul King. The Soul King eyed the being in question, unsure what to make of the individual. "He is trustworthy." "He is not a Togabito," Rita told him, "he is my herald." "From where?" "I cannot say, not even to you, Your Majesty, my apologies." Much with Zero, it is imperative that his identity remain void for now. "I see," the Soul King said and morphed into an anthropomorphic, albino snake wearing a black, hooded cloak and having 3 heads. "I trust," the middle head spoke, "that you have things under control." "Yes, Your Majesty, what would you like me to do if either of us feel that they are not?" "There is a presence currently within the Library of Infinite Knowledge. I sensed Kiryu and Senjumaru attempting to investigate it earlier, but I'm afraid the invader may have already found a way to tighten their lips. Shall I drive them out?" Rita prepared to go for her staff, hanging just above the entrance to the room on a rack. "No, let us wait. I believe she is connected to the man who is attempting to kill me, Charles Zi Britannia." "Kill you, Your Majesty?" Rita nearly laughed at the absurdity. The Emperor of Britannia must be insane. "Oh, he is, but I am content to let him try. Shall I tell Retsu?" "Don't bother. This is a matter for our dimension only and it will be treated as such." "Yes, Your Majesty," Rita acknowledged with a bow. The Soul King then left without another word. Cornelia's mobile base. Cornelia's day was not going well. Just as she returned to her command post to take the reins, she found that Ishikawa had fainted her and had been tipped off by her initial coming. She'd only managed to take out the Chinese involvement. And now here was news that Kurugi, an honorary Brightonian she had actually thought might become the exception to the rule of her all 11s suck thought process, had been insubordinate. The bad news kept getting worse as Guilford informed her that the enemy had destroyed the Great Kanman Bridge at Kyushu. He continued to inform her that it was not the Chinese Federation that was oncoming to reinforce Ishikawa, but a Japanese man that fled to the Chinese Federation, Atsushi Sawasaki. Cornelia became cross and stood up. "Your Highness. We prepare for war. Contact the ambassador and try to find all you can on Sawasaka's motives. Contact Meredith and contact Viceroy Bareilles of Area 12, we may need backup against that many warships." "Yes, Your Highness." "Right away." Cornelia watched Guilford go and then gave a cold stare to the soldier that had brought her the news about Kurugi. He knew that was his cue to leave. Cornelia stood in front of the command deck and looked at the map screen. Well now, things are getting interesting. Cornelia soon had ships in the water and a battalion ready to go with support from Bareilles warships and Meredith's airships, though this would be chaos if the battle became drawn out and support was even necessary, but Cornelia always believed in the motto of, better safe than sorry. Guilford approached her with news. "My lady, I have information regarding Sawasaki." "Go on." "Yes. While the ambassador himself was uncooperative in person, I uncovered that Sawasaki is the reason the embassy even has its foundation to begin with. So then that means if we take out Sawasaki." Guilford nodded to affirm Cornelia's thought process. "Yes, we can invade the embassy with no consequences. Apparently the higher-ups are willing to throw the embassy under the bus if Sawasaki fails." Cornelia grinned. "Then let's win us a battle, shall we, Guilford my knight?" "Yes, Your Highness." Cornelia explained her plans and, at the behest of her half-brother, her opening move was the Lancelot piloted by Suzaku Kurugi. Personal grudges could be set aside if the order came from Schneeisel. He was every bit as much a strategist as Cornelia. In fact, he was more so. He was considered the greatest mind of all the imperial family, possibly even greater than that of the emperor himself. Cornelia felt she could trust any order he gave into the void so long as they fought on the same side. And, of course, Kyushu was taken. Momo and Nozomi's unit cleaned up the mess left behind by Zero and Cornelia after departure. The Chinese ambassador tried to maintain that this was unrelated to the Federation, but Cornelia shoved the evidence in his face. "I don't think so, Ambassador," she said with a sly smirk. "If you want your P released, you're going to take your embassy and get off my land." What? But those are my terms. Otherwise I'll leak to the public everything I know, the refrain, the slaves, the Ishikawa prefecture. I know you've been corroborating with Sawasaki and we have him in custody. How many dunks in subarctic water do you think it'll take for him to confess his partnership with you? The ambassador swallowed. That's what I thought. You have 5 days. Cornelia's voice was sweet, but her tone was firm, or I burn this place to the ground. Even after the embassy was vacated and abandoned, Cornelia still had the building blown to bits. She couldn't stand the sight of it, calling it an eyesore. She then returned to the Tokyo settlement and was very much interested in seeing her sister face to face. Everything looked like it was going fine until Euphemia's speech about the SAZ. To be continued. Chapter 163, The Console of Euphemia Lee Britannia. Area 11. Minutes ago, Cornelia had been down in maintenance, touching up her Gloucester. She had just returned a large allotment of her troops from conquering Area 18 under the command of General John Masters, and from some of the reports she read it sounded like things proceeded rather smoothly. She had gotten to give Yuffie a warm welcome upon her own return from Kyushu, and things looked like there would be calm before the storm, but as the winds of change blew, so did the storm's source. Guilford, as always, and was becoming routine, was about to bring Cornelia bad news. This was in the form of Yuffie's declaration of the SAZ, throwing all of Cornelia's plans of a single nation under Britannia rule that she could then control and redistribute herself in chaos and improbability, making a majority of her efforts meaningless. On top of that, Cornelia's fear grew as Yuffie put herself further and further in danger of becoming a target of assassination. What is she doing? Cornelia shouted in fear and anger. Princess! Cornelia banged her fist against the workbench in front of her and continued to scowl. Idiot! That stupid idiot! Euphemia, you cannot do this! You fool! You'll destroy not only my plans, but you'll make yourself a target. Don't do this! Guilford! Why yes! Get that broadcast shut off! I don't care what it takes. Yes, Your Highness! Guilford declared and ran off. From Cornelia's tone of voice he knew failure was not an option. Cornelia then brought her fingertips to her forehead. And could someone get me some aspirin? Cornelia requested. Yes, Your Highness. The men in maintenance dispersed. Cornelia sighed deeply and then returned to worrying about her sister. Euphemia. Yuffie's speech carried on until formal declaration of her immediate dismissal and removal by Cornelia was carried out. Yuffie was formally escorted away, Suzaku with her, and soldiers had to keep the public from mobbing her. That evening, Zero spent most of night hours metaphorically banging his head against the wall. So what are you going to do? CC teased him. What do you care, you got what you wanted. Zero barked, knowing that CC got her pizza. Aren't you a great strategist? You always think of something. Or is this where the magnificence of Lelich 6 Britannia and Zero ends? You daft fool. Zero turned around and grasped CC's shoulders tightly, glaring at her. Don't you understand? I'm finished. History. Euphemia just destroyed everything. I have no way out. CC turned her head to the side. What are you, 5? You sound like a child who was just sent to his room. Lelich's scowl depended and he pushed CC away forcefully. You even throw like a child, she mocked. All of the nerves on Lelich's body bristled with hatred towards his sister. He walked over to the window, looked over it and scowled. His hand covered his face. His fingers were spread apart and the entire appendage was tense with pressure. The past is dead. He internally admonished Yuffie. It cannot be reclaimed. You fool, there can only be one. Cornelia's office. Yuffie was escorted by Guilford and another soldier, with Suzaku trailing close behind, but was closed off from the Viceroy's office and barred entrance. I'm Euphemia's knight. I need to be by her side, he argued to Guilford, who stood with his back to the door. This is a personal matter between members of the imperial family, Guilford told him. Even though I am Princess Cornelia's knight, even my presence is not permitted. Those were Her Majesty's strict orders. But do not forget your place, Kurugi. Guilford had nothing against Suzaku personally. Any soldier that tried to go against Cornelia's direct orders would answer to him all the same. Yes sir, Suzaku looked at the floor. Guilford eased up a little. Besides, as a knight we are to protect the members of the royal family we are assigned. Princess Cornelia and Princess Euphemia are the closest of siblings. They seldom fight. There's nothing to worry about. It was at that point that Guilford and Suzaku heard gunfire. Suzaku motioned to push past Guilford, but the older man's hand was already on the knob. Princess Cornelia! Guilford shouted as he pushed open the door. Suzaku and Guilford both stared into the room, lit only by moonlight. Cornelia's gun was extended, aimed towards the wall where a single bullet was now embedded in the protective frame of a painting of Marianne and her children, drawn by Clovis. Yuffie turned her head to look at Guilford with Suzaku looking beneath his armpit since his arm was right at his eye level. Guilford, Cornelia spoke calmly and firmly, I said no interruptions, regardless of circumstance, unless Zero was captured. Forgive me my lady, Guilford got down on one knee, I heard gunfire. I feared the worst. Suzaku felt like he wanted to faint. The strength left his legs and he collapsed backwards onto the floor in spread eagle position. Both he and Guilford were afraid one of the sisters had turned on the other. Ah! Suzaku! Yuffie tried to go to his side, but Cornelia reached across her desk and grabbed her sister's shoulder, stopping her. Yuffie understood that Cornelia wasn't going to let her go so wantonly and therefore stopped, stood in place and looked down at the floor. I was just trying to prove a point to the sub-viceroy. Please do not disturb us again, Cornelia told him. Cornelia's point had been that Yuffie's action was murderous to Marianne, Lelich, Nunnally, and Clovis and their memory. Yes your highness, Guilford said as he closed the door and saw Suzaku down on it. He rolled his eyes, understanding the young man's reaction, and lifted him up by his humerus and then gave him a light shove forward to get him to walk. Suzaku took a look back at the office and then left the area. Back inside, Cornelia put her gun down on the desk. Do you understand, Euphemia? Your actions could allow Lelich and Nunnally's killer to go free, and what if the next bullet that gets fired at the member of the royal family hits you? What will you do then? In all her life, Cornelia had never yelled at Euphemia, not once. The sisters never argued, not once, not like this. I won't be. Foolish naivete. Cornelia declared. You're making yourself a target. The only reason I'm able to get sleep at night is because I know you're just down the hall. I hate Area 11. I hate just being here. I hate it with every fiber of my being. What you're doing is nothing more than self-righteous pandering to the masses. This isn't peace. It'll only be a matter of time before His Majesty overturns this decision and wants the resources Mount Fuji has. Kurugi might be a figurehead and the hope of the Japanese people, but he is not a superhero. You can't hide behind him all the time. You don't have the stability to stand before a hungry media. To stop an invasion. Every nation needs a government, even a micronation like what you're setting up. Who do you think will be in charge of that nation, you and Kurugi? Idiocy. That's what this is. Idiocy and impulsivity. Even if you were, what will you do when I am called upon to roll into the nation and wipe it out? If you give an egg, they will take the chicken coop next time. This is stupid, Euphemia. This. The Prime Minister approved of this, and regardless of your warnings I'm going through with it. Euphemia said firmly. In her anger, Cornelia got up from the table, stomped around her desk and struck Euphemia across the face with a fierce slap, causing her younger sister to yelp. She picked her up by her shoulder joint, causing more yelping, and stood in front of her, glaring at her. How dare you go behind my back like that? Don't you trust me anymore? Yuffie couldn't look her sister in the eye. Look at me when I'm talking to you, Euphemia Lee Britannia. Just let go already. There were tears in Yuffie's eyes. This is for you too. Cornelia was confused. I've seen how bitter you've become. Yuffie still wasn't looking at Cornelia. How ruthless you've started to act. That isn't the sister I remember. Cornelia, you know I love you, I always have. You're my sister. But, Yuffie now looked at Cornelia in the eye with tears streaming down her face. Why can't you stop hurting and forget the pain? I already have. Why do you have to hate so much? Cornelia let go of Yuffie and stood in a moment of shock. Euphemia righted herself and looked at the shocked face of the second princess. After the initial shock, Cornelia gripped her left forearm with her right hand and looked at the ground in depression. You don't understand. If I don't understand, then make me, Yuffie cried. You have to stop treating me like a child. Cornelia put her hands on Yuffie's shoulders. They weighed down heavily on the teenager. Don't you understand? Now Cornelia was crying too as she spoke with a soft voice. I always wanted to be the only one to protect you, the only one you would need. Please don't be the one that tears the entire family apart by doing something so foolish. Why can't I be the sister who protects you anymore? Why do you have to put such distance between us? You were the one who put that distance there, Viceroy. The last word was said as a means of slight contempt that Yuffie, though sweet as sugar, could still hold a petty grudge or dislike. Cornelia's fingers clutched harder to Yuffie's shoulders. Lady Marianne once said, if you love someone you should keep them at an arm's distance to keep them from getting hurt. Here in Area 11 you're too close. I can't. You mean you won't, Yuffie corrected with a harsh, anguished exclamation. That's not true at all, Cornelia denied with tearful anguish. Yes it is. Yuffie continued to argue. Schneeisel sees that I'm not a child anymore, but you still treat me like I can't think for myself. I've made my decision, Cornelia, a big tear rolled down Yuffie's cheek, why can't you support me like always? Cornelia let Yuffie go and backed up towards her desk. She slouched and stared awkwardly at the floor as she put her palms on the hardwood behind her. I won't support someone whose decisions bring them closer and closer towards death. I'm not going to die. I will succeed. Cornelia pivoted sharply and held her head high after turning completely around. Then leave. Cornelia looked out at the stars. You've made your decision and there's nothing I can say that will persuade you not to go forward. But when you fail, Cornelia started her sentence harshly, but came down softly and ended with, I won't be there to comfort you. I'll just give you a disapproving stare, and tell you I told you so. Yuffie was incredibly disheartened. For once she had hoped that Cornelia could forgive and forget, but it seemed she was wrong and that hurt her a great deal. She had always had Cornelia's support in everything even when Yuffie herself didn't necessarily need it, but was still thankful for it. Now when she needed and wanted her big sister's support the most she couldn't have it. It hurt Yuffie. It hurt her a lot. I'm sorry you feel this way. I really thought you understood, sister. Euphemia turned around and opened the door to Cornelia's office. She stood in the doorway and looked at her sister. But it seems your eyes only see the path of bloodshed. I am truly sorry you cannot think any other way. Perhaps one day your eyes will open. Just leave already, Cornelia said bitterly as she had become hunched over her desk. Yuffie said nothing and shut the door. Cornelia gripped her desk and slammed her fist down onto it and growled in frustration. Days passed and, when he was available, Cornelia contacted Schneeisel to speak with him. Oh, Cornelia, when I heard I had an important phone call, I didn't expect to see your magnificent presence. Spare me the flattery, Cornelia snapped. I called to talk to you about your decision to approve the sub-viceroy's plans. Schneeisel smiled warmly. Euphemia really is amazing, isn't she? Now the terrorist groups in Area 11 will lose their popular support and fall apart. Public order will be stabilized. I personally oppose this, Cornelia said with a calm demeanor. But since you understand the situation, you've sent Darlton to advise her, have you not? To assure public policy stays on track. It's a measure that a viceroy would obviously take. Did you approve her plans as the viceroy or as her older sister? Cornelia turned her head to the side. What are you trying to say? I'm saying, are you assisting her as part of your political agenda, or is that protective instinct of yours kicking in? Euphemia isn't a child anymore, Cornelia. She's still an impulsive, airheaded fool, Cornelia spoke contemptuously. My, that's quite the insult towards your sweet, innocent sister, Schneeisel responded with his smug smile not dropping for 1 second. Innocent is probably the perfect way to describe this, Cornelia continued to scowl. She has no grasp of the reality of what she's doing. So what I suspected was right. You are acting in the interest of preserving her life, not as a political figurehead. Cornelia's scowl deepened. I took this position as viceroy to crush Zero under my heel and to avenge Clovis. What Euphemia is doing undermines that completely. You of all people I thought understood that. Cornelia's anger reached a high point, but she wasn't yelling. She paused in order to compose herself and then asked, the bigger question is, what are you up to, Schneeisel? Schneeisel's smile was unsettling in some way to Cornelia as she frowned curiously at him. Why, Cornelia, do you suspect me of something? Treason perhaps. Cornelia snorted, the day you turn against Britannia is the day rabbits learn to fly with their ears. But yes, I suspect you of a plan of supreme grandeur, something I suspect even His Majesty might disapprove of. Perhaps if you prove useful, I may let you in on that plan, Schneeisel said with that continuously unsettling smile, and closed communications. Saz Day. Or rather that was the name it was going to go down in history as, sometimes with the word massacre tacked on at the end. The day that Princess Euphemia, the massacre princess, ordered the deaths of many Japanese, murdered them all, was stopped by Zero and shot and killed. It was complete and total chaos. The Soul Reapers under the command of the captain of the 10th Division, Lamperouge Lelich watched the slaughter and bloodbath occur. Those that had been at Nerita were beside themselves. Everyone was silent and Lelich, scowling, emotionless Lelich, could not help but want to cry as he watched, but the tears just wouldn't come. It was like reliving a nightmare that he could never wake up from. He wanted to stop it. He wanted to have been there and smacked his other self upside the head just to prevent Yuffie's life. Part of him felt that by not stopping in the interest of a better world he was letting Yuffie take double the blame just to preserve his own selfish ends. Oh, he very well could reboot reality if he wanted to, there would be no one to stop him. But he wasn't going to do it. He wasn't going to trade away thousands of lives for his own personal ambition, and this made Lelich feel incredibly selfish and incredibly frustrated. How would he face Yuffie in the Soul Society? How would he explain all of this to her? At the time of the incident, the first time, Lelich had been more focused on stopping the chaos, on being Zero. Now though he could look at things with the eyes of a bystander, and he was finding it hard not to find himself emotionally distraught by the whole thing. Thousands of people were dead because of him. Worse yet, he had to watch it all. Before he had actually been there to stop it from getting worse, but standing on the sidelines was even more frustrating and torturous. The worst part of it all, he couldn't justify it. He could not justify this at all. There was no single reason this had to occur. He had thrown in the towel, tipped his king, hung up the mantle, tossed away the crown. In other words, given up. Susanna herself could only watch in horror as well. Lelich had told her about this, but it was nothing like watching it. In the Soul Society everyone watched the massacre. However, as bad as it was, only those that were privy to Lelich's past, Yuna, Byakuya, Anohana, Stefan, Shunsui, Tissen, and Yucatake really understood the cause of it all. Damn, look at all of that blood, Kenpeka said, mesmerized. That's not the reaction I expected from you, Zaraki Teiko, Anohana said to him. I live for battle, Zaraki said with a low growl, this is like roasting a pig. It's disgraceful. Senseless violence isn't the same as combat. Kenpeki, though he'd killed many people in his time, never killed anyone that wasn't armed or hadn't attacked him first, usually both. Even he had his standards. Yachiro was understandably upset, and Rukia, Kyan, and Renji were all completely bewildered as to this. They couldn't believe Euphemia Lee Britannia was capable of something like this. She had sounded so sincere. Hisuna however wasn't so fixated on the screen as she was calming the screaming Yachiro, begging for all the killing to stop, while looking around the room at the other captains who seemed dismayed. Studying them, it almost seemed like they knew something. Hitsugaya was scowling and growling. They have no right to do this, he exclaimed at one point. Senna and Rurakiyo couldn't watch. Both had experienced something similar, and the trauma of that experience was starting to come back. Both held their heads and stared at the floor, trying to block out the screams. They were lucky they did not have to block out the stench of death as well. Naomi was biting her thumbnail while clenching the rest of her fist as she held her elbow, wondering what the hell had gone wrong. She was with Rukia and the others on this one, but rather than stare with a jaw drop she was trying to calculate the possibilities. Kendra just looked with indifference. As someone that was not a stranger to unnecessary bloodshed, she could only watch and study what was going on. She suspected nothing. She knew that even the sweetest of individuals could be the most ruthless of killers. She did not know Yuffie personally, so why should she be so shocked, or rather such was her logic. Vera's reaction was interesting to say the least. She was mesmerized by what was going on, seeing the killing and the massacre as if wondering how long it would go on for and not when it would stop. No one seemed to notice. Jin had to keep Nemia from instinctually shutting off the monitors, and Ashido and Yumi Chika could only do the same as Renji, Rukia, and Kaien and just stare off into space from the sheer shock of it all. Shunsui was the only one with a comment to end to the situation, but it was not meant to be light-hearted. As he stared towards the floor he took a deep breath and said, "Lelouch-kun, when you said you caused a massacre, you really meant it. You were also right about something else. I can't believe the amount of blood that is on your hands." Area 11. At the sight of the SAZ, Susanna clung to Lelouch's side in tears, grabbing at his clothing. "You didn't really cause this, did you? When you told me about it I couldn't fathom its depth, but this is so terrible. I know you didn't mean it, but why did you do this? I don't want to see this anymore." Susanna buried her face into Lelouch's chest and he held on to her, damning the fact that he was not producing tears, despite how upset he was. The worst part is not watching it, Lelouch thought as flashes of the incident from the last time appeared before his eyes and the scent of blood wafted through his nostrils. "I've already lived through that." More grotesque images appeared before him. "The worst part is I can do nothing to change it. I had an opportunity, an option to change the course of history, but I had forgotten how awful it was." Lelouch's eyes were closed as he remembered it all, comforting Susanna with his Haori as both had their shut her eyes away from the bloodshed. "Euphemia, if I could only apologize, if I could only tell you what you had done, told you that I didn't mean it at all, stopped myself, rewritten history." Lelouch let out a feral yell of anger as he held Susanna as tight as he could to his body and shouted towards the sky. Susanna mumbled something into his chest as her tears lessened. "What's that?" Lelouch asked with a sympathetic voice. Susanna lifted her face so that her chin rested on Lelouch's forearm. "I said the worst part is that I selfishly held on to you. The phantoms are always supposed to do what is right. I wanted to stop this, I wish there was something to stop this, but Susanna looked at Lelouch in the eyes, "I'd selfishly rather have you instead. How can you look at me like that? How can you still think of me so highly?" Susanna hugged Lelouch around his neck. "You didn't mean any of it. I know you did not. Your sister will go to the Soul Society. You'll get your chance to apologize. You regret this ever happened. You've atoned. You've." Susanna let out a yelp as Lelouch pushed her away and she fell to the ground and banged her elbow on the metal bleacher beneath the one she and Lelouch were standing on and nearly banged her head on the concrete ground. "Shut up. Just shut up." Lelouch shouted in anguish, eyes tightened and face scrunched up like he had just eaten a lemon whole. "Please." He opened his eyes and looked at his hands like he wanted to wring them around his own throat. "Don't try to make me feel better. Not for this." He stomped his foot on the ground and clutched his fingertips to his face as he shut his eyes. "This is pointless to justify." Lelouch dropped his hands at his sides and came down several decibels, speaking with pure anguish. Why did this have to go and happen?" "Lelouch Dono," Susanna spoke his name. Lelouch ignored her comforting call and continued to brood. "Lelouch." This time Lelouch did react as the loud yell was accompanied by a strong spiritual presence rushing right towards him. "You bastard!" Susanna gasped as Lelouch was struck in the face by a flaming fist and sent flying higher into the stands, banging his head against one of the bleachers and finding his ass in the vicinity where one's feet should be and the backs of his knees dangling over the next row down. "Lelouch Dono!" Susanna called out in worry, clambering to her feet. "Damn!" Lelouch put his hand to his face. "What in the world hit me? I felt like I just got thrown by Zaraki Teiko. Get up." The same voice that had called his name earlier was now making demands out of him and Lelouch could feel their shadow over him. He opened his eyes and looked up. Looming over him, wearing a short black t-shirt and matching pants with long raven-colored hair stood Arisawa Tatsuki, eyes full of tears, and a frenzied look upon her face. Arisawa. As the blood trickled down his forehead from her blow, the person before him registered in his mind. He blinked with surprise and awe as he removed his hand from his head. Why, Yuri alive? No thanks to you, Tatsuki scowled, grinding her teeth. She looked like she was going to wallop him again in a matter of sentences. Lelich stood up and took a pose of crucifixion as if to say, if you want to kill me, do it. I deserve it. However, his actual words were, I never meant for what happened to Kurosawa. This isn't about Ichigo. Tatsuki yelled. Lelich looked at her with confusion and dropped his hands at his sides as he gasped. Not about Ichigo? Then what? Tatsuki's fists were balled at her sides as she stared at the ground. My mother and father, they applied for the SAZ. Lelich gasped again. He was speechless. He couldn't think of anything to say to the 33-year-old woman in front of him. He felt anything he said would be meaningless. And, also, he didn't know where to begin explaining it all. Not justify, explain. Justification was impossible, but he felt that Tatsuki should at least know the truth, but words would not form. Thankfully Tatsuki was speaking anyway. I know you had something to do with this. I know you're Zero. At the very least I knew you knew about it. Ichigo fought against Britannia and that was his decision. It was a decision we all agreed to do. That's not your fault. He was a warrior and he fought to the bitter end, just like we all did. I know you couldn't have meant for that even if you knew about the invasion. The almost understanding tone Tatsuki was using became more and more hostile by the second, and her speech rate quickened, as she continued her speech. But you know, don't you? You knew about the SAZ, you knew that some of us were still alive. You were here, I could sense you, so why? Tatsuki grabbed Lelich by his lapels, leapt forward with bringer light and slammed him against the backboard of the stadium pews and shouted into his face, her face full of rage, why didn't you tell me it was going to end like this? If I had done that. I don't care about changing what has already occurred. If that was fate, so be it. Your fate is Zero, we're simply observing, but you have to understand, I just fucking lost my parents. The only two reasons I'm not pummeling you right now are because number one, I don't want the whole Soul Society coming after me, and number two, it's not going to bring them back or make me feel any better. You didn't have to do anything of the sort. Susanna tried to defend Lelich with her words. You have power. You could have swooped down and saved them. Tatsuki looked at Susanna with the same rage-filled expression. I wasn't anywhere near here until I heard about the massacre going on and saw them dead on the ground. She looked back at Lelich. What the hell is the matter with you? Why did you never reach out to us? We gave up after Ichigo fell because we understood what the rest of Japan was doing, that Japan's unconditional surrender protected it in a fashion. Why do you think we never fought back after we recovered? Do you think I want to see people suffer? Lelich shouted back with an anguished expression, do you think I like reliving my life from the shadows? No, probably not, but that doesn't matter. Tatsuki exclaimed. I oughta beat the shit out of you. She raised her unused fist back, but it was grabbed calmly by Susanna. Arisawa, she said to the raging woman, your parents were good people. So I'm sure they're probably in the Soul Society. Tatsuki shook Susanna off and sent her crashing to the ground again. Susanna yelped as she hit the ground. Is that supposed to comfort me? Tatsuki snapped. She started speaking in a mocking tone. Oh, don't worry about your brother. He's in the Soul Society. Oh, I'm sorry your sister died, but she's in the Soul Society. She spoke again with rage. That doesn't change how much it fucking hurts. Hey, she was only trying to help, Lelich shouted, but this only earned him Tatsuki pulling her elbow back an inch and slamming him against the backboard again. Lelich tried a different, less anger-filled approach. He spoke calmly after taking a deep breath. His expression was neutral. Words will never be enough, but I am the one that will shoot Euphemia, and also she is my half-sister. Lelich could still hear the violence going on. He knew it wasn't over. I regret every little tidbit of this incident and regret not being able to stop it. You flying off the handle like that and shouting at me doesn't change that fact. He paused. Tatsuki's anger didn't waver, but he felt her grip loosen a little, so he knew she understood what he was saying at least. I will not ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Not from you, and certainly not from Euphemia. Arisawa, you are a valuable ally to the Soul Society. I had Urahara write that letter because we meant every word. If you put me down and come with me, I can have you brought to the world you belong in until this mess blows over sometime next year. Next year? Next year. There'll be a large lull in it, but yes, next year, Lelich told her. Tatsuki let Lelich go, took a step back, put her hand on her face, leaned back, covered her right eye with her hand and began laughing hysterically. Oh wow, isn't that just fucking wonderful? Arisawa, Susanna spoke her name with concern. Tatsuki steeled herself an about-face. Sorry, but I'm not going to the Soul Society. Why is that? Lelich asked inquisitively. I want to watch you for just a little longer. Tatsuki's rage had subsided from her voice. Oh, she was angry, fucking pissed to all hell as she would put it, but she understood that now was not the time to be acting on that anger. You're right, yelling at you is wrong. This isn't your fault. If I'm going to make things proper, I should strike at the source. You mean Britannia? Lelich asked. Lelich considered this to be his fault, but he knew that if one were to look deeper at the underlying layers of what was going on, that this whole mess could be blamed on the Britannian Empire. Yes, Tatsuki nodded, given cause I will strike Britannia with every bit of my power. I will flatten the nation to the ground. If the rise and fall of Zero, Tatsuki knew Zero would fall because of Lelich standing behind her, does not get results, I will take matters into my own hands. I will not stop you. Or rather, I should say, I cannot stop you, if you make that decision. Lelich needed to stop Tatsuki if that was the case in order to preserve the time stream, but Soul Society would not authorize him to do so. Also, he knew what would give her cause to strike at the source, the death of Anu Orium. As far as Lelich knew, Orium was not in any danger of dying. Goodbye Lelich, Tatsuki said. She extended out her wings from her final form, flapped them and took off quick enough to not be seen. Why isn't she attacking right now? Susanna asked. Because she still has a life link, Lelich stated. A life link. A reason to hold on, a reason to remain here in Japan. You mean Anu Orium? Yes, Lelich nodded. Soul Society. The members of the Godei watched as Zero gunned down Princess Euphemia. Yachiro was finally starting to calm down, but she was still using Hisona's Shiakusho as a security blanket. This all really happened? Rukia asked, jaw hung open. Hisona cupped her hands with her own. The world is unfair, I know. But why did he shoot her? Surely there were other options, Hitsugaya protested. That was his only option because he had geased Euphemia Lee Britannia, Yukatake spoke up, sounding rather unusually upset, but that was mostly due to his soft spot for children. Yukatake, Anohana reached out to calm him, but she could see the serious, disdained look in Yukatake's face and therefore went quiet even though she was in charge. I feel that they have a right to know, Yukatake said professionally. Lelich would want it this way. What do you mean, Yukatake Teiko? Renji asked, rising to his feet. Everyone, I'm going to explain to you exactly what went on in Zero's meeting with Euphemia. Area 11. Dear God, Cornelia had just found out about Euphemia's final fate. She hadn't even been deployed or escorted from the plane carrying her nightmare. As she fell forward in shock against the control panel, a feeling welled up inside her. Though broken, only one impulse fired off in Cornelia's mind, the want to scream. And scream she did. Cornelia reared back and screamed with all her fury and pain to let out the animalistic hate, unconfronted sorrow, and her deepest regrets in one loud sound. She remembered the last thing she said to Euphemia. When you fail, I won't be there to comfort you. I'll just give you a disapproving stare and tell you, I told you so. Why did I say that to her? Cornelia shouted as she slammed her hands on her control panel. 16 years of joy and mirth between her and her sister, and her last words to her were cold and unfeeling. Worse yet, Yuffie was a kind and gentle person that would have never committed something like that. What had gone wrong? What did Zero do? However, with the way Cornelia felt right now, it almost didn't matter. SAZ Stadium. With the entire SAZ massacre now over, and the surviving Japanese now cleared away, Lelich and his cleanup crew took action. Lelich made sure to separate from the group at his first chance. While the majority of his allies cleaned up the stadium, Lelich wandered around the outside. When he and Kyokaku met face to face, Lelich expected her to strike him once since that would be in her nature. But all she did was give him a look and say to him, "Personal business after professional business." Lelich nodded and understood. Susanna tried to follow, but Kyokaku stopped him. "Give him some space, Sue," she said, calling to Susanna by a nickname. "I know you mean well, but Lelich looked like he could use some time alone." "But he needs me. He needs me at his side, I know it," Susanna said frantically. Kyokaku cupped the sides of Susanna's shoulders and looked her in the eye. "You did your part. Let him off by himself for a little while, okay? He'll come back to you when he needs you again." "You're right," Susanna wiped her eye. "Lelich Dono needs his space." It wasn't so much the space Lelich needed, but just that he didn't want to be inside the stadium. He didn't need dirty looks from his subordinates. Momo for sure he figured would give him a good tongue lashing based on Susanna's reaction. Lelich, however, in his despair and anguish, wasn't thinking completely clearly and therefore did not realize that many of his subordinates would ultimately blame Euphemia as a manipulative bitch. Or maybe he did realize it and didn't want to deal with that either. Whatever the case was, Lelich definitely needed to be alone. He walked with his hand on his Zanpakuto, and looked around outside the stadium to see if there were any holes from the Brighton Neons or the 11s that had been outside the gates and died. There was one and only one, and it was the last person Lelich wanted to see wandering about aimlessly as a lost soul. Why can't she be on the other side? Why does she still have to be here? Lelich sucked in a breath through his teeth when he saw a shade of pink hair in a white dress wandering about the torn-up streets and former battlefield. "Hello." The dressed-up individual called out with her hands around the outside of her lips. "Someone. Anyone. Answer me." She ran over to a new location as she began to shout out name after name. "Suzaku. Cornelia. Zero." She dropped to her knees. "Please." Yuffie felt like she might cry. She was so confused. With a heavy heart, Lelich walked up to her. "I can't let anyone else go to her. This is my cross to bear, my sin to atone for." Lelich felt like he was going to vomit, but he held it in. "I can't break down. I have to put on a brave front." Euphemia Lee Britannia, he spoke to her as she sat on her knees in a ditch while he stood on a raised group of rubble. "Your time has come." My time." Yuffie stood up and turned around. She gasped when she looked up, saw Lelich's face and the black and white uniform he was wearing. Eli Lelich. Lelich couldn't admit it all to Yuffie. He wasn't ready. She was not yet ready to face the truth. He had expected to have more time, heck he needed more time to be able to face her after Zero Requiem. For now he had to keep her ignorant, otherwise he didn't know what would happen to him mentally. "No, I am not your half-brother. I am an advocate of death known as a Soul Reaper, sent here to carry you on to the next world. I can take whatever form I wish, and so, to help you pass on, this is the form I've chosen." Lelich lied. "Why do you linger? It's best if you move on. You no longer have a place in this world. And no. I want to see the new world with my own eyes, but all I've seen is death and destruction." She looked at Lelich with adamant protest. "I just want a sign, a single sign that I succeeded, and then I'll be happy." "I'm sorry," Lelich glanced away in guilt, "but I can offer you no such sign." "But why?" "I promise I'll go quietly if you just show me a sign." Yuffie was no fool. She knew something was being kept from her and she wanted to know what it was. "I can show you nothing." Lelich paused, finding it harder and harder to talk with every passing second, "because there is nothing to show." Lelich realized he almost slipped up. "I mean your half-brother, he did something that messed with your mind," and a memory of the massacre flashed through his mind. The moment in which Yuffie begged him not to have her kill the Japanese flahead through his mind. You wound up. The moment in which he shot Yuffie flashed through his mind. Lelich's hands clenched. He tried to fight the tears and tried to keep a straight face, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't tell Yuffie the truth and pretend not to be himself. The burden of guilt was too great for him to bear. Lelich ran forward to where Yuffie was sitting on the ground and dropped down to her level. He then threw his arms around his half-sister in apology, dropping to his knees. This action took her by complete surprise. Lelich breathed in irregularly, his sorrow building up with every bit of breath drawn in. He sobbed as he spoke, tears coming down his face. "It really is you." Yuffie was confused. She couldn't understand why Lelich would lie to her. She also couldn't understand what he was doing in such a strange outfit. She was completely missing so much information, and her last memory was inside an intensive care unit, and she could have sworn she felt her heart give out. She had yet to notice or feel the chain in her chest. "It is," Lelich sobbed, "I can't do it. I can't lie to you. I'm sorry, Euphemia. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. Oh dear God. I'm so sorry." "Lelich," Yuffie was still ultimately confused, "what are you talking about? Please explain to me. Suzaku told me everyone was happy. Why did he lie to me? What didn't he tell me? What really happened? Why does this place look like this?" Her last question she squeaked with anguish. Lelich stood up and let go of his sister. "Take my hand, Euphemia," he said with tear-stained eyes, "I will show you." Yuffie's hand slid into Lelich's and he took her into the air. "Why, you can fly. I am not the same as you know me. I told you I would explain everything in a bit, but..." Lelich felt his vocal cords paralyze for a split second. The bad news must come first. He took Yuffie to a TV and video store where a news story was being played about the outcome of the SAZ. Yuffie looked horrified as she saw the gleeful smile she had on as she ordered the deaths of so many 11s. The words "massacre princess" stung her like an arrow straight through the heart, the tip seeped with corrosive poison. Yuffie was struck speechless and in complete and utter shock. She would have forgotten to breathe if her body didn't do it for her. "It's not true. This," her voice skipped a breath, "this can't be true." Yuffie started to hyperventilate. "This," her eyes started to dampen, "this is some kind of bad dream. She laughed nervously, "I'm in a coma and I'll wake up and this'll all be like a bad dream." Lelich looked at the ground. He only said 2 words. "I'm sorry." "No," Yuffie denied, "this isn't real." Tears started to fall from her eyes while she remained in shock. Yuffie dropped to her knees. "It's not real." She cried out. She bent over and clutched her hands to her head, eyes shut. "I didn't do that. You didn't make me do that. You didn't shoot me in order to stop me." Yuffie crumpled into a fetal position on the ground and continued to cry. She couldn't think of anything else to do. She couldn't think of any other action to take. "When you fail, I will tell you I told you so. I'm sorry for not listening." Yuffie sobbed, remembering most of what Cornelia said to her as tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry, Cornelia. I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. Look what I've done by trying to do everything myself. No, I didn't do anything wrong. So why am I being punished for it? Everyone must hate me even though I had no intentions of deceiving them. What am I supposed to do?" Lelich picked her up off the ground and held her close, bringing her into his embrace. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for it all. I'm sorry for what happened. I'm sorry that I shot you, and I'm sorry that I can't do anything but apologize. You gave up. Why did you do that?" Yuffie squeaked in hysterics. "I didn't mean to," Lelich sobbed, clutching her closer, "I had no intention of doing it. I had given up. Euphemia, you were supposed to win. I was supposed to lose. I can never atone for this sin. I can never ask you to forgive what I've done. Euphemia, I didn't mean for it to happen. I'm so sorry. I want to undo the past, but I can't. I hate all of this." "Yes, you could have. I didn't do anything wrong. Why did you do that to me?" "I don't know, okay?" Lelich shouted. The 2 half-siblings had a good cry in each other's arms. Euphemia was crying because of the shock and the revelation, Lelich because the guilt had finally caught up to him. After the tear fest, Lelich took Yuffie away from the television sets and took her to the ruins of Shinjuku, where he was certain they could be alone and he could do his best to explain himself. Again, he was only going to explain, not justify himself. He maintained that nothing could justify this senselessness. He told her all of it. Everything from his existence to the moment they were at now, and he answered all of Yuffie's questions. That was the least of which he owed her. He started his explanation with what he was and why he was out in the open. He then explained about his temporal displacement and about Zero Requiem. From there he continued to explain about his live self's future and how he and his live self were connected, preventing Lelich's interference. Euphemia could tell he never meant for any of it to happen, even the first time. She could tell it was an accident with catastrophic results. The time paradox confused her, but then again it confused just about everyone. All of what Lelich did though, how much he had tried to atone, she could tell that her death had affected him greatly. She could see how Lelich was down on his knees and bowing his head to her standing form by the time he finished, showing how low he was compared to her, despite the very opposite being true on many different levels. Lelich was also trying to symbolize that he was at her mercy and that if she was going to verbally or physically chew him out she had every right to do so. "I can never ask for your forgiveness," Lelich told her as he trembled on the ground in anger aimed at himself combined with anguish and regret. "And even then you shouldn't forgive me, not after what I did. Lelich, it was an accident. You keep repeating yourself by saying that you didn't want it to happen like that," Yuffie said calmly. "That doesn't matter." Lelich smashed his fist into the dirt, slightly scaring Yuffie. "You're innocent. Sweet. Gentle. Pacifistic. And I turned you into a murderer. Every 11 in Japan blamed you for something you didn't do of your own free will. And it's my fault. You don't deserve the title of Massacre Princess. You should be receiving a commemoration right now, not being slandered and passing on to the other side." Lelich was not surprised when Yuffie dropped to her knees and lifted his chin. He felt she was going to slap him across the face, which he felt he good and well deserved. However, she didn't slap him. She wasn't even mad, or so her expression would indicate. Instead she lifted him higher by his shoulders and wrapped her hands in a dove-shaped pattern behind his back as she gently hugged him. "But it sounds like to me that you too have suffered as well. Please stop punishing yourself for something you've worked so hard to atone for," Yuffie said to him. "Euphemia," Lelich choked on her name. "Lelich," her serene expression changed to one of concern. "If you really want to make it up to me," Yuffie put her forehead against his and looked at Lelich right in the eye with a serious look, "then please show me the world that you die for when it's your time to come." Lelich smiled softly and held Yuffie to him. She rested her chin on his shoulder. "That I can do." Lelich let out a deep breath. He felt as if this was his chance at closure. He was starting to feel better. His sister's kindness had helped him feel a little better in ways that Susanna was unable to reach. "Susanna." Lelich remembered how he had thrown her to the ground and yelled at her. His expression became regretful. "I'll have to apologize to her." Lelich took another deep breath and realized that, if Yuffie understood his suffering, he felt it would not be out of place to ask her one thing, despite the fact that he shouldn't. He could feel Yuffie's gentleness and knew that she would not hate him if he asked. "I know I don't deserve it," he began with a sorrowful tone, "but will you ever forgive me for what I've done, Euphemia?" He paused. "I understand if you never do, and I've resigned myself to knowing that you never will. What is there to forgive?" Yuffie asked. "You didn't mean to do it." "You still don't get it," Lelich spoke bitterly. "Yes I do," Yuffie rubbed the back of Lelich's head. "And it's not your fault things wound up the way they did. Why else do you think I denounced my Britannia name? If I'm going to make things proper, I should strike at the source." "So she blames Britannia as well." Lelich smiled a little. "That's the Euphemia I know." He stood up. "Then, although you have forgiven me, or haven an equivalent of that kind, I cannot accept your forgiveness. There are things I must do first, before I can consider that I have earned that forgiveness." Yuffie became slightly angry. "Lelich, that's not fair to yours. This is out of your hands now, Euphemia. Let me do my job." Lelich clicked his sword out of his sheath and looked at his sister, "and you can start your new life. However, since you renounced your Britannia name, I don't know where you'll end up, but I..." Lelich sighed. He couldn't ask Euphemia to ask for directions. The Rokanga would likely attack her given it would now be littered with SAZ massacre victims. He had to find a way to ensure her safety. He thought about it for a minute until his mind hatched an idea. He whipped out his soul pager and dialed a number under recent calls with it. Yes. Kendra, it's Lelich. Oh, she said with a cold tone, it's you. Lelich sighed, yeah, I can understand that reaction. Listen, I'm about to perform Euphemia's Kinso. She disavowed her Brighton name so I don't know if she'll end up in the noble house. If she doesn't, he paused, but considering he had Kendra on the phone already he knew that the point of no return for this course of action was far behind him. Can you send Patrol Corps to look for her? It would mean a lot to me. I never meant for this to happen. Soul Society. Kendra thought upon her answer carefully. After what Yucatec had told everyone, though she was angry at all the civilian death, something inside her told her that the right thing to do was not to hold the innocent girl accountable who hadn't asked to be caught up in Lelich's twisted world. Yes, I'll do my best. I'll make sure she's safe. Thank you, Lelich said to her and hung up. Kendra put her pager away. Was that Lelich? Yucatec asked her. Kendra nodded. He wants a search party sent out for Euphemia. He's about to perform her Kinso. Huh? Won't she end up in the Britannia noble house? Ashido asked, confused. He said she disavowed her Brightonian name so he doesn't know, Kendra stated. Yucatec Teiko, thank you for explaining things to us. I'll be back. You're actually going to help him? Even after what happened? Hichugaya snapped. Didn't you trust him despite the Atremir massacre? Kendra asked, not realizing Hichugaya had not been part of that. Besides, Lelich is still a captain. As he is, he's done nothing wrong. Legally we cannot turn against him ex post facto. As she said all of this and let the whole charade sink in, she had an epiphany. He is showing this to us. The words to explain her epiphany were hard to find, because he regrets it and because he doesn't want to hide it. Can you see what kind of man he is by owning up to his past mistakes? By revealing it to the world he calls his home. I can. Yuna and Nemu declared simultaneously. They wanted it to be known that they agreed with what Kendra was saying. When Lelich returns home we should treat him no differently, thank him for having the courage to share such atrocities with us, Yuna stated. Kendra continued to speak calmly. Yes, the fact that he's showing this to us, shows that he's willing to trust us, to know that all of what he's done up to this point was because of the guilt and pain he feels from what occurred. If we treat him harshly for what he did, how do you think he'll react? Yes, and we took a vow to let him loose, despite his geese, Stefan acknowledged. Byakuya was the next to speak. He's a hero to the Soul Society. That goes without saying. His actions as Zero will have varying responses from person to person, but there's no denying that as Lamperouge Lelich, a Soul Reaper, and a captain no less, that he always did what was right and did not use contemptible means. Lelich walked outside lines as a member of the Phantoms, but not like this. Not beyond our own standards of laws and justice. Exactly, Kendra stated. Now if you'll excuse me, she began heading for the entrance. I have a job to do. Area 11. Shinjuku. All right, enough delays. Are you ready to go? Lelich asked. Wait, I have one thing I want to know first. Yuffie said. At Common Island I had thought about it, but I never asked it directly. What is it? Lelich asked. Why did you do it? Yuffie asked him. You're going to have to be more specific. Zero. Why did you become him and do everything you did involved with him? Why did you hate us? Didn't you realize we loved you? Euphemia asked. I told you how much time Cornelia had put into the cause behind your mother's death and so many other things. Lelich looked solemn. Lelich. I didn't then, but I do now, and suddenly it all feels pointless. I can never take back what I've done, but I. Lelich just sighed in frustration and started his statement again. I watched it happen. From the world you are going to, I watched Cornelia try to save Nunnally and me. Yuffie hugged him again and nuzzled his neck. It's okay Lelich, don't cry. Lelich touched his eye, tears were dripping down. He then held Euphemia tighter to him. I can never make up for what I've done. That's not true. I'm sure you've done your best in the time you've had. I will see that progress for myself, won't I? It will never be enough. That's up for me to decide, Euphemia told him, and Cornelia too. Lelich blinked out another tear. I'm ready to go now, Lelich. Euphy let him go and stood with one arm reaching behind her back to grab her left wrist. Tell me, what can I expect on the other side? Euphy asked inquisitively as she tilted her head slightly to her right. It's a place where there is little war and strife. It's the kind of world, Lelich thought about how cheerful the Soul Society could be. How, despite the nobles looking down on the weak, how, if he really thought about it, how the Soul Society was his ideal world. It hadn't started out that way when he arrived, but through all his hard work over the last near century and a half, it had become so close to the world he had always tried to make it. This made him smile. It's the kind of world I've always wanted to live in. Really? Euphemia was so happy to hear this. I wouldn't lie about a place I've lived in for nearly a century and a half, Lelich told her seriously and began to draw his sword. Now then. Wait. What? I kind of need to draw this, you know, Lelich chuckled. I don't want to leave with the last thing I see of you as being in tears. Euphy gave Lelich a stern look and then smiled. Will you smile? Just for me. Lelich tried to force the corners of his mouth upward and after some struggle managed to get out a smile, a full smile. How's this? That's better, Euphy smiled and ruffled Lelich's hair. I will see you again, right? I'll be home soon. I'm sure you'll love the Soul Society. There are a lot of nice people there. I'm well known there too, but I am known as Lamperouge Lelich, captain of Squad 10. I can remember that. You've said it so many times already. What you've done sounds so helpful and nice, much unlike the Brighton military. After a pause Euphy said, maybe I'll become a Soul Reaper then. That sounds like a nice thing. What? Lelich was surprised and in shock. But you hate fighting. But I'm doing it to help people, right? You said we cleanse corrupted souls. That means no soul is beyond salvation. There are some that go straight to hell, but for the most part yes, Lelich kept up his forced smile, we cleanse them. Then I want to be a Soul Reaper too, and when I do, Euphy smiled at Lelich, can I be in your squad, Lelich? Lelich was about to make up some excuse to tell her no, but he knew he owed Euphemia big time. Saying something like, if you've got the aptitude, was not something he felt was something he should say in this situation. So, instead he said, with a forced smile, of course you can, if you've got the aptitude. Then I'll show the aptitude, Euphy said, getting pent up, I want to be useful to my big brother. Can I send you on now? Lelich asked. Sorry, yes, Euphy rubbed her head and smiled with her eyes closed. I'm sure you have other souls to attend to besides just me. You are worth 1,000 souls, Euphemia, Lelich told her with a serious, and Euphy smiled, warmed by his feelings towards her. Lelich pulled out his Zanpakuto and tapped Euphy on the head with the pommel. She began to fade and disperse. I'll see you soon, Lelich. Yeah, Lelich nodded, I hope our next meeting is on happier terms. After Euphy faded, Lelich put his sword away. She's gone and my conscience is clear. Yes, you certainly were under a lot less stress. Closure will do that to people. Lelich nodded. But just as he was about to relax, he felt a strong presence. He whirled around hard and fast to see the hooded Soul Reaper he had seen at Narita standing behind him on a higher level of ground. You. So, you actually regret this action? I'm surprised. Of course I regret this. If I hadn't witnessed this with my own eyes, I wouldn't have even known your involvement in it. What are you talking about? Lelich scowled. I'm interested in everything that you do. When I saw you going to meet with the princess I darted in. What? Lelich exclaimed with a gasp. I had a narrow window since your green-haired friend has spiritual power, so I had to wait until the elevator platform opened, then I darted inside before you and the princess stepped on without being seen. Lelich just stared in silence, gawking. I watched you. I thought things were under control and then. You fool. You know me. You know things go badly. Why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you interfere? Unlike you, I don't know how it all ends. I can track you, I can follow you, but I do not know the future, that's why I am watching you. When you used the situation to your advantage, when you shot Euphemia, I became puzzled as to whether or not you truly regretted this act. Who are you to judge me? Lelich shouted while gnashing his teeth. Now that's a funny question, haven't you always wanted someone to judge you for what you did? Haven't you always felt that you seemed to have gotten away from the grasp of hell where you feel you would belong? How do you know that? Lelich trembled. He hadn't told a soul about that except for his wife. Does it wound you not to know things? Stop being so arrogant. I should cut you where you stand. Lelich shouted in anger. Then try it. I'm right here. Lelich drew his blade and rushed towards his opponent with Shunpo and attacked, but he missed completely. His opponent had moved only just enough out of the way. Lelich took his sword and began attacking. His first blow was blocked before Lelich realized his opponent had even drawn his sword. After that block all of Lelich's other blows were parried with ease until Lelich felt out of breath. That's enough for now, his opponent said, sheathing his blade. I have all the data I need for now. You, who are you? The Soul Reaper vanished without an answer. Damn it! Come back here! Lelich shouted, but it was pointless. The Soul Reaper was long gone. What did he mean by data? Why is he observing me? Just who is that? Don't point your frontal lobe at me. You don't know either? Lelich was surprised. Who do you think I am, an all-knowing omnipotent being? Just because I have better common sense than you do sometimes doesn't mean I know everything. So then we're both confused. Lelich put his sword away. You couldn't even tell which Zanpakuto you were clashing with? Who do you think I am, Kurosaki Ichigo, that I can just learn things by fighting someone and feeling the emotions behind their blade? Do not speak ill of the dead. Lelich chastised. Sorry. You miss him too, huh? He was a good guy. Always scowling, easy to rile up, but he was a good ally for you. That he was, Lelich said, and knew that he had to return to the SAZ site in order to apologize to Susanna and collect his status report. Come on, there's more work to be done. I'm with you. Hell. Rita's abode. Rita sat upon her apparatus chair, utilizing the program she did to judge souls. One of her servants entered the room. Rita-sama, he's returned. Send him in, Rita said without turning around. The hooded Soul Reaper that had crossed blades with Lelich moments ago entered the room. Welcome back. He regrets his actions. The hooded Soul Reaper didn't beat around the bush. Did you think he didn't? You've known him long enough. She continued to do her work as she chatted. It would make things a lot simpler. When has the truth ever been simple? Rita said with a hint of the fact that her partner should have known better. Good point, and that's why I came to you in the first place. And that's why I decided to take you under my wing. She glanced back at her herald, but did not turn her head. Are you here because you want to know when to go back out? I'm here to rest and to report in. Very well. I shall wake you if something interesting arises, Rita told him. The hooded Soul Reaper bowed out and left. With her right arm Rita grabbed a different panel of the apparatus and tapped a few buttons, and soon Lelich was visible to her. Lamperouge Lelich, born Lelich 6 Britannia, you are becoming quite the interest to me. You asked who my herald was to judge you, but he is not. I am. Court is in session, Lelich, you are on trial and I am judge, jury and, if need be, executioner. SAZ Stadium. Lelich returned to a bunch of tired Soul Reapers and a whole bunch of mats rolled out with some of his squad members attending to injuries, with Momo and Isane overseeing the whole thing. He felt like he just missed a lot of action that still hadn't cooled off yet. You just missed the most awesome fight ever, Kyokaku said with a grin as she approached Lelich, only to notice the emotions coming off of him and immediately changed her tune. I felt you move away from the area. I figured you didn't want to be disturbed. I assumed the second least favorable outcome. We were fine without you though. I was going to call you as a last resort, but Katetsu-chan applied for Gentei Kaijo for Hinamori. After that, it was a piece of cake. Good call, Lelich told her and turned his attention to Momo and looked all around. It feels like everyone's present and accounted for. Not everyone, we lost 2 Soul Reapers. I'm sorry, it was out of my hands, but Lelich reached out and caressed Momo's head. He felt that those 2 lives should be on his conscience, not hers. Don't worry, it happens. It's hard leading such a big group. I'm looking at all the injured and I'm amazed by how many you did save. From what I can feel, I was worried we could have lost a lot more. Thank you, Momo. Momo's face expressed a toothy grin as she tapped her index fingers together. Her sensei's praise meant a lot to her. Lelich looked around. Where is Susanna? Kyokaku pointed to the far end of the stadium. Lelich looked to where she was pointing. She's been waiting for you since everything ended, Kyokaku said, lowering her arm. Her arm was banged up before the fighting, but she fought regardless. She's fine now though. I'll go to her. Call Rangiku, Nozomi, and Mei and tell them to be ready for the round 1 grand finale. Understood. Lelich made it to Susanna with one burst of shunpo. He sat down next to her and put his arm around her, pushing her head against his shoulder. I'm sorry, about earlier. That's okay. It is not okay. Lelich snapped. Susanna looked at him and at the distress he was feeling and the tension in his hand muscles. He sighed, Susanna, why do you always come to me no matter how I treat you? It can't just be because I'm nice to you. I shot in the stomach. I slapped you across the face. I used you to get Byakuya and Hisuna closer to each other. I went behind your back while you were pregnant and slept with Rangiku. I pushed you to the ground earlier and injured your arm. After all of that, how is it? Lelich turned towards Susanna and looked at Susanna in the eye, cupping her chin. How is it you still look at me with such eyes? Eyes that speak to me and tell me that I am a deity that can do no wrong when clearly I am very flawed. Colin used to look at me with these same eyes. If you can't think of a reason, a good and solid reason to look at me with such eyes, then it's no different from when Momo looked up to Aizen. Worship is not the same as understanding. You need to stand up for yourself instead of clinging to me all the time. If I attack you again, I feel like I could get away with murder and you would still look at me with such eyes. It's true that, when I first met you, it was because you were nice to me. That's what drew me to you, but... Susanna took Lelich's right hand into both of hers. As I grew to know you and as you opened up to me, to the phantoms, I began to realize how complex you were and became curious as to the great burden you carried with you. I wanted to ease that burden for you, to shoulder that burden with you. I want you to be able to vent your anger, to let loose because I know that deep inside it's because somewhere within you that you're suffering and it hurts me to see you suffer. And when it hurts to see someone suffer, for their pain to be yours, is that not what it means to love someone? But there was no suffering when I shot you. There was no suffering when I cheated on you or when I used you. When you shot me, you didn't want me involved, but I knew you too well, even then. The cheating and the using don't matter anymore in the long run because I have you now and I know that you'll never do it again. We've been over this twice already. Susanna paused to eliminate her slight animosity. I look at you with these eyes because I know that your decisions will always come to probable outcomes. You can't always know that. What if, Lelich thought of the craziest thing he could think of, what if I murdered Yuna? You would never. You don't know that. I do know that. Susanna got within centimeters of Lelich's face. I know what you will do and what you would never do. I know that when you are steeped in darkness it's because you want the rest of the world to feel the light it is hiding. I look at you with these eyes because I know what kind of man you are and what you stand for just from being at your side all these years. I don't worship you, Lelich Dano. I do understand you and that's why I look at you with these eyes, eyes that are welcoming, eyes of comfort, eyes to gaze into your very soul and see the pain within. That is why I love you, Lelich Dano. Lelich would have cried if all of his tears hadn't been spent on Yuffie. Susanna's gentle caress of his cheek seemed as if she understood that too. I'm glad that you could have closure. It's like she can see right through me. Susanna, Lelich leaned towards her and kissed her on the lips. Susanna's eyes closed as she let the sensation envelop her. He bent her over backwards, pressing his hand firmly into her back as he loomed over her. Susanna looped her arms around Lelich's neck. He sucked on her lips as he was entranced. It was obvious now. Susanna was the woman he had been searching for all his life. She had Colin's loyalty. She had Shirley's desire to be near him. And like Cece, she understood him perfectly. And unlike anyone, she didn't have to snap at him to show it. She would always be around for him. He hadn't made a mistake in marrying her. He and Susanna broke away, but kept their lips open and breathed into each other's mouths only to latch onto each other once again, but briefly. Susanna then snuggled against Lelich's chest with Lelich stroking her back as he lay back against the bleachers. He smiled with joy as she had a serene, closed-eye smile on her face as she pressed her head into his sternum and placed her hand gingerly upon his heart. "Oh yeah," Kyokaka said, looking from far away and holding up her hands like she was trying to take a photo, "that's one for the album." "Shaipani-senpai means a lot to sensei," Momo said. "Yeah, she does," Kyokaka said with a smile. She looked behind her to notice that a crowd was watching. "Hey! What are you idiots just doing standing around? Get to work." "Hi! Shiba Kyokaka-sama." The crowd dispersed. Lelich looked at how the sun was peeking through the clouds despite there being so many. "One more to go and then I can have a break." "Susanna, thank you. With you at my side, this will be survivable." End of chapter 163. Chapter 164, Cornelia vs. Zero, The Black Rebellion. Area 11. Viceroy Palace. Cornelia sat in Euphemia's room in front of the fireplace, upon the rug, legs outstretched, palms spread flat out, just staring out into space. Gone. Her sister was gone. Her last and only reason for living was gone. Cornelia had trembled in almost every portion of her body at some point, and sometimes all at once, with fear, loneliness and emptiness, or all three at once. This wasn't like when Marianne died, when she refused to eat or go on. That was depression. However, if that was depression, then what was this? What was this feeling she was feeling right now? Mia, her sister's name hung on her lips. Warm memories flooded her mind, but they were fleeting and slowly fading. Cornelia's fingers twitched as she stared up at the ceiling. She sat in Euphemia's room in shock, feeling that if she waited long enough that Euphemia would waltz back into the room and things would be okay. Yes, that was right, right? Euphemia wasn't dead. She was just in a coma. Right? Cornelia tried to rationalize the thought of waiting, but every thought that went through her mind just brought her back to that one point and that one exchange of conversation. "Guilford, what's happening? It's absolute chaos out there. What about Euphemia? Please tell me she's all right." "Viceroy, I don't know how to tell you this, but just give it to me straight, Guilford. Princess Euphemia has been shot." And then, hours later, news of her death had arrived. Wrong. They had to be wrong. Yuffie wouldn't die on her. Cornelia still had to apologize. Yuffie had promised she wasn't going anywhere. Cornelia's heart wouldn't stop jackhammering in her chest at random paces. This wasn't depression. It was on a whole different scale than depression. That was what the empty, dead, trembling feeling in Cornelia's body felt like. Cornelia's cell phone went off. Her ears heard it, but the signal to her brain that was supposed to go off to answer it did not fire. Cornelia was lost inside. How could she go on without her sister? What was she supposed to do without her sister? Everything felt meaningless. Her goals, her dreams, her ambitions, it all felt pointless. Her voicemail picked up. Since it was a cellular phone, Cornelia didn't hear the message live. She would listen to it later. Suddenly her mind gave another thought. She would listen to her phone later, if she would listen to it later. Cornelia strolled over back to her bedroom, connected to Euphemia's, shutting the doors between the rooms. She waltzed over to her desk, her mind acting on autopilot, the shocked look upon her face not leaving for an instant. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a handgun. Her face still full of shock, she pressed it against her chin. Her mouth wouldn't open far enough as it hung slightly open due to the shock, and Cornelia hadn't the muscular strength in her shocked state to lift the gun barrel to rest in between her teeth. "It's over," she thought to herself. Euphemia, Lelich, Nunnally, Lady Marianne, I will be with you all soon. Cornelia's finger clamped around the trigger, but just as she was about to click it in far enough to fire off the bullet that would end her life, she hesitated. Her hesitation was not one of instinct, but it was as if something was keeping her tethered to this world. If you pull that trigger, doesn't that mean you've given up? A voice in Cornelia's head asked her. I don't want to exist in this world anymore. Not without anyone at my side. Cornelia responded to it. Can you do that with a clear conscience? Can you pull that trigger without first exacting justice? Justice, I hate that word, Cornelia responded bitterly. And what about Euphemia? Does she have the bitterness to commit genocide? Does she even have any hate? No, Cornelia released the trigger, she doesn't. You can end your life whenever you want, but first, aren't there two things that need to go first? Yes, Cornelia lowered her gun, there are. Tossing the gun aside, her eyes scowling, Cornelia grabbed her cell phone and dialed her voicemail. She had a message from Nonet. Nellie, I didn't expect you to pick up, but I hope you get this message. I can't imagine what you're going through right now, but before you grieve, before you give in to despair, you have to do something else first. Stop Zero. Finish him. Then you can do whatever you please. Zero must be stopped, and you are the only one who can stop him. Get vengeance first, and then I will do whatever I can to help. I'm already trying to get clearance to come to your aid. So don't worry, Nellie, you're not alone. I am always with you. You still have me. Of course, Cornelia thought with a smirk, yes, I still have you, don't I, Nonet? Cornelia stormed into her office and opened a communication line to the Glaston Knights. This is Viceroy Cornelia. All units in the Glaston Knights are hereby put on standby in preparation for Zero's attack. We'll wipe him out with one final fight. Cornelia had the fire of war lit within her eyes. It's the final battle, Zero, got it? No more games. You've taken everything I have, but that also just made me more dangerous. I may not have anything left worth living for. But I also have nothing left to lose. She shouted even though she was alone. However, the shout was meant to fire up her own previously lifeless body. A fire lit in her soul. Cornelia was running on adrenaline yet again, for the time being. She stormed towards the boardroom where her subordinates were discussing military matters with Guilford. Cornelia entered into the room. Maybe the homeland can help us. They'll never make it in time. Then we should evacuate this area right away. Those were the lines Cornelia walked in on, and the lines she would rally her troops from. Don't panic, she declared, making her presence known. Guilford looked up from his monitor. Princess Cornelia. Cornelia stood with her hand on her hip, scowling. I've put the Glaston Knights on standby. Place all our forces on the outskirts of Tokyo. We can end this. We just need to take down Zero. Kill him and the day will be ours. Yes, Your Highness. The soldiers all filed out of the room and began moving into position to prepare to fight against the battle. Guilford stayed behind as Cornelia remained in the doorway. Princess, he crossed his arm over his body in salute. Are you sure about this? Absolutely, Cornelia looked at Guilford with a scorned look. Zero must die. That has been true from the very beginning. I meant about going into the battle. I will have vengeance for Euphemia. Everything else can wait. Yes, but I'm a soldier, Guilford. I was too lax with Zero, I regrettably admit that. Her strong scowl turned to one of bitter hate. I should have grinded him under my heel from the very start. Zero has taken away all meaning to my existence, but that also means I have nothing left to lose by going up against him. Her tone now entered one of bitter hatred and spite. If any 11 saw her, the grimace on Cornelia's face would befit the woman called the Witch of Britannia. I can fight him with everything I have. Yes, Your Highness, understood. Guilford was a little troubled by Cornelia's dark hatred, but he suppressed it out of loyalty to her. Cornelia returned to her neutral, strong scowl. Nonet said she's looking to get clearance. If we can hold out until she arrives, the battle will be ours. Yes, Your Highness, understood. Now, let's go. Yes, ma'am, General-in-Chief, Viceroy and Princess Cornelia Lee Britannia. With that, preparations and standby for the Tokyo battle were underway. The countdown to the end had arrived. Or rather, the countdown to what everyone thought would be the end. In reality, it was only the first phase, the end of the first saga of Zero. Of course, no one except a few onlookers from the sidelines knew that. At midnight, the battle began, and Zero's opening move was to desegment the structure of the Tokyo settlement, taking Cornelia by complete and utter surprise. The Black Knights fought with superior tactics and strategy and pushed the enemy back. Then, Kurugi Suzaku took to the battlefield, destroying the electromagnetic cannon manned by Yoshida, killing him when it went up in flames. Suzaku continued upon his rampage, making his way to the back of the enemy where he was sure Zero would be. Fortunately for Zero, but what would be unfortunate later, Suzaku's path crossed with Colin and the two engaged in battle Gurren to Lancelot. Thankfully, Zero was willing to meet with Suzaku one-on-one with the Gawain and declared the idea to finish things once and for all. However, it was a trap to immobilize Suzaku. Eventually, Zero caught wind of the air raid, and once he had destroyed all of the airships, he landed on top of the Viceroy Palace garden. Cornelia was in her Gloucester waiting for him. She declared for them to engage in combat. Zero was flustered by the fact that the Gawain had superior specs, but Cornelia's superior skill allowed her to get the jump on him and latch onto the Gawain from above. She was about to pin him down when fate decided to deal Cornelia a cruel hand again, this time in the form of her most trusted ally and comrade, Andreas Darlton, betraying her at a crucial moment. He shot her down and caused Nightmare to crash and cease function. Zero thanked Darlton for her services by destroying his Gloucester whole and complete. Cornelia's Nightmare was destroyed, the battle was finished. Zero had practically won. However, while Zero moved in for what he needed from Cornelia, he too was being dealt a cruel hand. Nunnally was in the midst of being kidnapped by Vivi, brother to the Emperor of Britannia Charles Z.I. Britannia, aka their uncle. Oblivious to this, Zero continued his check. Cornelia emerged from the twisted burning wreckage of her Nightmare frame and crawled over to a rock to rest her back against it. She was in pretty bad shape, worse than she'd ever been before. Her left arm was all mangled up, possibly broken or fractured, and she was bleeding from her forehead. Before she got to that position though, she had coughed blood onto the ground. She watched as the Gawain landed. I tried my best. It doesn't matter now. Go ahead Zero, you win. Cornelia was surprised when Zero exited the Gawain, but then chuckled. Of course, he probably wants to execute me with his own hands. However, Zero then showed her his face. Cornelia felt like her life was now a complete and utter nightmare. Zero's identity was her half-brother she thought long since dead, Lelich VI Britannia. She choked for a moment on anything to say, but eventually she just ceased to care. She would be dead and Lelich would continue to live. Things were over and a somewhat favorable outcome could be undergone. At least now she understood why she lost and why Zero had fought the way he did. All the pieces fit together, it all made sense. To think that all this time the man behind the mask was a dead man. She sat up straighter and then spoke to Zero. I see, she breathed in and out to lower the pain before speaking again, so you were Zero the entire time. Zero now stood before her, directly in her line of sight. Darlton was right. He said it was someone with a grudge against the Britannian imperial family. You did this for Nunnally. She had to make sure that Nunnally was still alive as well. Lelich, how you must hate me. I tried to be a good sister, I really tried. Cornelia saw the look in his eye and also how the bitter strife between them would prevent any glimmer of things going back to how they once were. It's too late now. It wouldn't matter to him. Both of our hands are too seeped with the color of blood. Correct, Zero answered. I will demolish the present world and build a new and better one in its place. You killed them all for the sake of that madness. Cornelia's sorrow was coming out in her tone, but Zero had no empathy for it. To him, Cornelia was a dead woman. Cornelia wanted to cry, but she was holding it in for now. If only I could have captured you at Saitama, none of this would have happened. If only I could have saved you 7 years ago, none of this would have happened. If I'd only captured you at Narita, Cornelia came closer and closer to producing tears, none of this. She choked on her own blood momentarily, would have happened. Clovis, even Euphemia. You're one to talk, my dear sister, considering how you idolized my mother, Mary Ann the Flash. Cornelia pushed off the rock and leaned forward. He doesn't know, and there's nothing I can do to stop him. Even explaining the truth to him is meaningless. He's not my half-brother anymore. He's just a monster. It would seem that talking to you anymore would serve no purpose. Indeed, Zero said with a cruel smirk. Well then, Zero moved his hand away from his eye that he had been covering the whole time. Lelich 6 Britannia orders you to answer him. He enacted the geese to use it upon Cornelia. It worked. Checkmate. Cornelia became submissive as she became controlled. Go on. Sister, are you the one who killed my mother? I'm not. Then who was it? I don't know, Cornelia answered in monotone. Zero was confused. How could she not know? He inquired further. But you were put in charge of her personal guard, were you not? Yes, Cornelia answered. Then why did you withdraw her escort? Zero asked contemptuously. I was asked to. The answer. Zero could feel himself drawing closer to the truth. By whom? He asked eagerly. Lady Mary Ann. What? That doesn't make any sense. Mother did. Zero gasped. That's impossible. My mother knew she would be attacked that day? No, that can't be. If she did, she would have gotten us out of there. What really happened back then? Zero asked with intense passion. Who killed her? Who killed my mother, damn it? Cornelia could not answer. You don't know the truth? Then who does? Someone must know. You yourself investigated what occurred that day. I remember His Majesty ordered Schneeisel to transport the body out of there. The body? You mean Mother's? Then, what was in that coffin? Hey! Get back in here! CC shouted. I know the government's defense forces will be here soon, Zero answered, heading back towards the Gawain. No. CC exclaimed with pressing urgency. Your little sister's been kidnapped. Zero made a confused face. CC, this is not the time for jokes. We'll take Cornelia back to the command center as our hostage. She's been taken. I just know because she's the reason you live. She's on Common Island. Common Island? Zero asked as he put his helmet back on, remembering the incident. That's when Jeremiah showed up to make things difficult for Zero. He failed to recover Cornelia, and in the turmoil she fell over in exhaustion. She'd survive even without immediate medical attention. Her wounds were not life-threatening, but still pretty serious. And from there, everything began to fall apart for the Black Knights. The third squad was wiped out, Suzaku was freed, Ogai had been shot, it was becoming one huge mess. I wonder who will come to my aid. Cornelia thought to herself, only to admonish the thought process. Why should I care? It doesn't matter if I live or die anymore, but Britannia needs to win. That's my code as a military commander. Lelich, Cornelia's thought process speed matched the pace of her breath. I'm sorry it's become like this. When Suzaku finally reached her, he rushed to her side. Your Highness. Is that you, Kururugi? Cornelia's vision was not the best in her condition. Yes, it's me. Will you survive? This is easily the worst injury I've sustained, but I'll live. Kururugi, I wish to apologize. Apologize? I see now that you and your people, I've held a wrongful grudge towards them for so long, so please, help us win. This battle situation bodes victory for my forces, am I clear? Every other word was said with effort due to Cornelia's injuries. She had felt so on top of the world for so long that she never had ever felt what it was like to be in such a serious condition. Do everything you can to hide the fact that I've been wounded. It will only upset them. Guilford and the Glaston Knights, you're the only one, I can tell. Don't try to talk anymore, Suzaku told her. Common Island, that's where Zero's headed. She wanted Kururugi to find Zero. She suspected them as friends. He had been sent to live with Kururugi. With the evidence of the letter that Lelich had sent Yuffie long ago and the Kururugi family being his place of residence, she suspected Suzaku would properly take Zero into custody without killing him. She realized that she didn't have the spine to kill Lelich anymore. A faceless terrorist she could kill with ease, but her own half-brother? Although he took from her the only thing that mattered to her, he'd also given back 2 more, his own life and Nunnally's. For that she would let him live, for now. And, more than that, she tried to recall her discussion with Lelich, but she couldn't bring it back to memory. It's no use, I can't remember. You're Yuffie's knight, aren't you? Then you must go and clear her dishonored name. Yes. I know. Cornelia struggled to get her uninjured arm up. This is a bit informal. She extended 2 fingers and swung them towards both of Kururugi's shoulder blades, one right after the other, but I dub thee Knight of Honor of Britannia. She put her arm down. You are now a knight of both name and station. Go, Suzaku Kururugi. Yes, Suzaku said, with renewed purpose and thankful for the princess' faith, Your Highness. And slowly, but surely the tide turned. The Black Knights began to lose as the sun began to rise. All their forces dead, Inu and Kent made a forward charge with Inu in front. She intended to strike with the only tactic she knew, Ichigo's favorite, but also the most foolish. A stray rocket slammed into her cockpit and there was a huge explosion. The top half of her beret was blasted to pieces. Her beret was destroyed. Kent blinked. Inu. Down went the greatest woman he ever knew. Ken hadn't known very many females closely in his life. On top of that, Ken had practically been a loser growing up. He was part of the nerd stereotype. While Minami was arguably smarter than him, Kent was highly engrossed in geek culture and constantly picked on while forcing a smile and doing his work. When Britannia crushed Japan, Naoto had found him in a very similar way he had found Inu, lost, wandering the ghetto and looking for a purpose. Kent felt like he was someone important if he was killing Britannians, and he thought that Inu felt the same. While he knew the woman was spoken for, desperately looking for her fiancé, Ken had grown accustomed to Inu. He had grown accustomed to everyone in the Black Knights. He finally was someone, he finally had a purpose. However, Kent still felt a little spineless and frightened at times, and yet every time he felt like running away or being cowardly, Inu always seemed to restructure him with her presence alone. January 2017 ATB. The sound of a 12-gauge rang out, scaring a flock of birds. The wielder, Inu, yanked on the pump to reload. She was practicing with the weapon to get better at it, lower her hesitation. After the incident with the slaves, she'd nearly thrown out her shoulder and therefore she needed some physical therapy to get back into the swing of things and minimize recoil. She'd never wielded a firearm before joining the resistance, so she was doing everything she could to make herself the most effective freedom fighter she could. She knew her fiancé would be proud of her if she did. Her target was an empty oil drum. She had stacked a second empty oil drum onto and painted with several red dots and kept trying to hit specific ones. Ammunition wasn't scarce to come by. All it took was a simple venture out to a ruin or ghetto to trade with other resistance units. And sometimes the group would prey upon unsuspecting Britannian soldiers and take their stuff. Colin also had connections, being a noble and all, and her parents weren't always eyeing where her allowance was going. Kent was watching her from afar. He'd grown to like Inu. She was strong-willed, wise, a great cook, and incredibly selfless towards the others. Sure, she was a little spacey and sometimes had a distant relationship with reality, but that's what made Kent, and some of the others, curious about her past. True, none of them shared how they'd gotten to where they were, but Inu in particular felt like she had been through a huge ordeal that brought her to them. Ogai was a teacher, Tamaki was a former high school student, Minami used to work in business, Yoshida had been in college, and Kent, well, he had been a traveler. After high school he never really knew what he wanted to do. In their wildest dreams none of them could have fathomed they'd end up fighting for their freedom, but Inu seemed more comfortable with it than any of them. While her leadership skills paled in comparison to Naoto's and Ogai's, though the latter was not too thrilled about having to be in charge, Inu was still the one that seemed to inspire the group the most. She was the group's medic and very good at patching injuries, but at the same time, while she hadn't having to be driven to it, she hated fighting more than any of the others, though that was slowly changing. Kent continued to watch Inu toil with her practice shots until she finally lowered the weapon and sat down, leaning against the mostly ruined building behind her. "You don't have to stand so far away, Sugiyama-kun," she said in her usual sweet and friendly tone. Kent was startled by the fact that she knew he had been watching her. He came out, rubbing the back of his head. Sorry, I didn't mean to spy." "It's all right," she looked up at him. "Is something wrong?" "No, not really," Kent said, taking a seat on the ground, legs folded, hands on the sides of his knees. Inu massaged her shoulder a little and flexed her arm a few times. "Is your arm bothering you?" "Just a little sore is all. I'm getting used to it." "You always work so hard for the resistance, why?" Kent asked her. "Because of him." "You mean your fiancé?" Kent asked. Inu looked forward and brought her knees towards her chest while she folded her arms over her breasts, looking solemn. "Ichigo, he always worked so hard to protect what it was he cared about, all the people he cared about. As long as I'm here, I want to follow in his footsteps. I want him to be proud of me. In case he really is gone, I want him to see that I can move on. You talk about him all the time. He must have been someone really incredible." "He was," Inu answered, smiling faintly. Kent sighed and stood up. "Mind if I take a few shots?" "Ah, sure." Inu handed the gun off to him. She stood a proper distance as Kent positioned the shotgun comfortably and then fired. He missed his mark terribly and the recoil threw his aim off. He was used to simply using a .38 caliber handgun, a much tamer beast. Inu walked over to him. "You can't hold the gun so haphazardly. You need to snugly grip it and not hesitate in your eyes." "Huh? What?" Inu hunched over him from behind and helped him readjust the gun to be a little more secure in his arms. Kent couldn't help but feel a little more than gratitude with Inu so close. Facts were undeniable, he was infatuated with Inu. Before he realized it, Inu was standing away from him and giving him a signal that he could fire. He wasn't going to look like a dumbass in front of the woman he admired. He took aim and fired. He missed again, but he wouldn't give up. After a while he started to get into the swing of things, but his shoulder was feeling numb. He put the gun down and began to shake it off. "Damn, my arm is sore." "It'll happen. You're not used to working with such a powerful weapon." "How are you?" Kent asked her. "You make it look so easy." Inu pumped her fists and showed confidence in her face. "I'm a black belt in 2 different martial arts. I have the muscular density for heavier firearms." "You really are incredible," Kent smiled at her. "You're a black belt, you can cook, you're smart." He paused and shook his head a little. "I'm rather envious of your fiancé." Inu laughed with a smile. "Thanks. It feels nice to be appreciated." Kent looked towards the ground with an insincere smile. "I never amounted to anything as a kid, but you always seem like you could really go far when this is all over. You know what you want out of life and where you want it to go. Me, I'm just a loser." "That's not true at all." Kent looked up at Inu to see how angry she looked. "Sugiyama-kun is dedicated and loyal to his country. He's a good guitar player and a lot of fun to be around." "You really think that?" Kent asked. Inu smiled widely with her hands clamped down at her pelvis. "You and everyone else in the group have something you contribute to it. We all want our lives back. Just by fighting, by telling the Brighton Neons they can't have their way, Sugiyama-kun is strong and brave. Not everyone would stand up like we are. You are a good person, Sugiyama-kun." Present day. Kent was now crying inside the cockpit of his nightmare as his face became enraged, complete with clenched teeth. With a fierce yell he fought with extreme tenacity against several Brighton Neon soldiers and Sutherlands. They had taken the only woman he had ever admired. Kent remembered some other conversations he had had with Inu and some other things he admired about her. She wanted to open up a restaurant. Kent smashed apart an enemy Sutherland. She wanted to have 2 beautiful children and become a school teacher. He opened fire on an aircraft and shot it down. She wanted so much out of life and she was fighting for what she wanted. Kent dodged bullet fire as he used a sloped pathway as a ramp and smashed into a Sutherland before taking down another one nearby with his berets/Harken. She was the greatest woman I ever admired. Kent shot down another pair of aircrafts. The only woman that ever thought of me as something more than a loser. An explosive round smashed into the hull of Kent's nightmare frame. The only woman I ever felt I loved. With tears of rage flowing down his face, Kent shouted at the top of his lungs, "Inu!" With crazed perseverance, Kent went absolutely wild, shooting and downing everything and anything that was bright and neon. Unfortunately, his energy filler gave out before he was even close to being satisfied with revenge. He manually exited his nightmare, pulled out a 12 gauge and began fighting on foot. He had a few other weapons on board, but had failed to grab them before the whole mecha was shot to a billion pieces, but he was partial to the 12 gauge, because Inu had trained him with it. It was all for naught though. A bright and neon soldier got in his blind spot and bashed him over the back of the head with the butt of their rifle. "Inu, I'm sorry." Those were Kent's last words as he faded from consciousness, destined to be taken as a bright and neon hostage. He wanted to keep going on and win this for her so that she could have peace, but he had failed and her death would be meaningless. But Inu was not dead. In a flash of a second, so quick that he did not register on a fact sphere, so swift that no one had seen him enter the explosion, the mysterious hooded Soul Reaper had rescued her just as the rocket hit her beret. Inu was aircraft height in the sky before she realized it, and she was firmly grasped in someone's arm, facing down towards the fighting and chaos. She too thought she was dead. "No. I'm not ready to go yet." She then realized she could still feel her body and that she was not drifting into the sky, but being carried. And now she was slowly heading across the air to a remote location in Japan currently not under fire. She turned her head to the right. "Ah, you." The mysterious hooded Soul Reaper had rescued her. "Put me down. I have to help them. My friends are in danger." "They." He placed his finger at Inu's pressure point in her neck and made her go limp and unconscious. The mysterious Soul Reaper stopped moving across the air. He looked at the girl in his arms and then noticed a familiar presence in the battlefield below, waiting until it was over before picking up the pieces. "If I leave her in his care, I wonder how they'd react." He swapped down and grabbed a pistol that just so happened to be lying about. He brought Inu to a safe location not being used for the battlefield. "I'll wait here until it's over, then I'll leave." He checked the weapon he had picked up for ammunition. "Good, I don't have to go hunting for bullets." He put it down at her side. The gun was for protection for after he left her side. He had to leave eventually. As he stood there, a hollow then broke through the Garganta, awakened by the chaos. It was dead before its full body had gotten out into the open. The mysterious hooded Soul Reaper moved swiftly like a black blur. The hollow hadn't a chance. "No one touches her." The Soul Reaper put his blade away, his scowl hidden by his hood. "Not on my watch." And then, finally, the battle ended. It was victory for Britannia. As Cornelia lay within her garden, a Scotch-pink nightmare, 9.99 meters tall with blue eyes and a thin build, landed from the air. Its pilot exited and descended. Out from it stepped a tall woman with blondish green hair and a royal uniform. "Hey there, Nellie, thanks for holding the fort." "Nonet," Cornelia smiled faintly and then passed out. Nonet rushed to her side. "Don't worry, Nellie, I got you." She radioed with her headpiece to Guilford. "This is Knight of 9 Nonet Enneagram, please respond." "Miss Enneagram." Guilford shook his disorientation off within a moment. "What are your orders, ma'am?" Cornelia seemed to have had a struggle with the enemy. "My guess is with 0. Until second Prince Schneeisel arrives, I am in command, is that clear?" "Yes ma'am." Schneeisel made it long after his presence was required. Nonet had already secured victory by the time of his arrival. The Black Knights were defeated, many of them captured, and finally the battle was over, allowing Lelich's forces could clean up the mess. Lelich maneuvered about the area with methodical coldness. His followers had their own battle to fight, but he himself also had business to attend to. He knelt down at every point he had observed during the battle. He wandered over to a group of 4 destroyed Boreas. "Okay, that accounts for Kazuna's corpse," Lelich noted and zipped around to find where he knew Inu's nightmare had exploded, "and here's Inu's beret, but where's?" A gun suddenly clicked into the back of his skull. "Stand up, Lelich." Lelich froze. For one thing, there was a gun pointing at the back of his head, which meant someone knew he was there. Secondly, they'd called him by name. Thirdly, the voice seemed a little too distinct for Lelich's liking. He slowly rose to his feet. I hope you know what you're doing. I am a captain, after all. Attacking a captain was treason in the Soul Society. Whoever this was, Lelich could have them punished in an instant. I know who and what you are. Lelich couldn't help but feel as if he'd heard the voice before, but couldn't place his finger on it due to the stressed ire being spoken to him with and the maturity in the voice speaking to him. Identify yourself. If you want to know who I am, turn around slowly. Hands where I can see them. Whoever this was, Lelich decided to play along. He had no idea what he was up against. Possibilities formed, but nothing conclusive, and if this person had skill enough to get the drop on Lelich, they were skilled enough that if that bullet had spiritual power behind it he might not die, but he'd have a pretty serious brain injury. Lelich liked and needed his brain. He slowly turned around and his face was in complete shock as to the woman before him. She had grey eyes, blue hair, and was wearing the uniform of the Black Knights, and she was scowling. Lelich knew who she was, but took note of the absolute lack of chain in her chest and the at the .38 caliber pistol aimed right in his face. Lelich began to panic and began to hyperventilate. No, you blew up. Lelich shook his head at the impossibility before him, back and forth. He pedaled backwards in shock. So you are in fact Zero, after all. I figured as much. Inu, put the gun down. Lelich moved his arm up and down with every word. I don't know why you hate me. I was a good commander to you. Relax, just relax. Lelich extended his arm out. Give me the gun. Inu grit her teeth in hate at Lelich. Don't pretend like you don't know who I am. Who you are, but... Lelich, confused as all hell, looked deeply at Inu. He looked into her grey orbs and glanced at her double D chest. See, can it be? Lelich imposed an astral image of a young teenager he had known 17 years ago onto the blue-haired, mature woman in front of him. The scowl threw him off a bit, but things came into view pretty quickly. Inu, you're Inu Orium. That's right, Orium kept her gun trained on Lelich. Okay, Inu-san, just calm down, Lelich spoke to her calmly. Just give me the gun and... A shot rang out past Lelich's ear. Orium continued to scowl. I know how to fire a gun, Inu told him, and I know how to hate. She took deep slowed breaths. Her fingers twitched in anticipation, eager to shoot again, this time to send the bullet straight through Lelich's forehead. Lelich couldn't help but notice how similar this looked. Instantly he could see him facing down Shirley as she held him at gunpoint and Mao prattling on. However, here there was no puppeteer, and Lelich knew that Orium had turned into what she was completely on her own. I can shoot you if I wanted to. Orium exclaimed. The corners of her lips turned upwards, but the smile on Orium's face didn't look inviting. It looked downright psychotic. I was just a weak, innocent, teenager with a heart of gold when you last saw me. She was laughing nervously, trying to hold everything in. You have no idea what I've been through. You might have some idea, but did you ever really care about any of us? She closed her eyes for a moment as she shouted. You shadowy, selfish bastard. After a pause and the dark look returned to Orium's face, she said, You knew, didn't you? You knew that the war with Britannia would come. You didn't warn us. Tears started to stream down Orium's face. You left us to face the enemy, not telling us what would become of us. Orium's face turned less of a face of a psychopath and her lip quivered and her face looked like she was going to break down any second. Her hands trembled as she held the gun. Ichigo fought to his very last breath. Orium spoke through stifled sobs and sniffs. He wanted to inspire hope across Britannia. But you knew about this. You could have stopped him. You killed him. Orium shouted at the top of her lungs, eyes shut as she shouted. She fiercely opened them again, walked up to Lelich and pressed her gun into his chest. Lelich didn't resist and just stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. He looked at what had become of sweet, innocent Orium, and all he could see was Shirley standing before him and what had happened to her when she got dragged into his mess. Orium smiled through tears again, but it was that crazy psycho smile from before. No one thought I could do it. In high school it was wimpy, pacifistic, gentle Orium. But no more. Orium pulled back the hammer. You think that just because I was gentle and kind that I can't feel hate? Orium let out 2 sobs. I've seen hell itself under your command. I lost Ichigo to this insanity. I hate Britannia. Do you hear me? I hate Britannia. I know how to hate. Orium kept blinking out tears. I know how to hate, she repeated, squeaking. So you know how to hate and you hate me, but let me ask you something, will killing me bring Ichigo back? Will killing me solve all of your problems? In the long run, will killing me make you feel better? Orium didn't respond at first. She just stared at Lelouch with a teary-eyed look. Then she put her finger on the trigger, and removed one hand from the gun. Her hand trembled. She intended to shoot Lelouch to make him pay for what he did to Ichigo, for what he did to her and to all of Japan. Shooting people was easy. Orium had grown accustomed to it over the years. So why was she hesitating? She couldn't understand. Her body tensed up over and over again as Orium vibrated between being committed to killing Lelouch and hesitating, knowing she might regret shooting him. Lelouch stood still waiting for Orium to make her decision about what she felt she was going to do. And then, suddenly, and traumatically, Orium dropped the weapon and plummeted to her knees, burying her face in her hands and began to cry. Lelouch breathed out deep. His words had worked. He didn't have to hurt Orium more than he already did. Orium started devolving into an uncontrollable, blubbering, sobbing, big busted ball of tears. She kept trying to speak and form words, but all that would come out was animalistic or incoherent whining and crying. Lelouch looked down at her with guilt and sympathy. He brought himself down to her level while the woman had her face buried in her hands and held her. He could see so many parallels he could draw to Shirley. Worse, he didn't have his geese. He had used it on her during the incident with Jinjo to get her to come to her senses, like most everyone else. Still, even if he had his geese, it didn't matter. He had to own up for what he did. Like it or not, Orium was now his responsibility. Lelouch wrapped an arm around Orium's back and pushed her into him, patting her reassuringly on the back a few times and alternating between that and stroking it. He's dead, Orium sobbed into Lelouch's sleeve, clinging to it like a tissue. You killed him. You killed him, she sobbed. Ichigo's dead. He's really gone. Orium was squeaking as she was crying, finally grieving, and finally coming to grips with reality. It had all been in her mind. Tracing his Ryotsu, following his path, not finding his body? She realized, as she collapsed, that she simply had a cold hard truth to face. There was no magic, no inseparable love. Orium had to come to terms with the fact that the man she loved was gone. You knew, she thought, remembering Ichigo's face, you knew when you left that you weren't coming back. You just didn't want to die with any regrets. She sat on the ground, crying into Lelouch's sleeve uncontrollably. I wanted to believe. I wanted him to be okay, but he's gone. Lelouch didn't say anything. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound insensitive. He just couldn't believe what his thoughtlessness had done. Orium, though not close to him, was one of the last people he wanted to hurt. She reminded him of Shirley just too much and he couldn't bear to look at what she had turned into, because of him. He promised me, Orium squeaked. Lelouch spoke with calm serenity. Sometimes we make promises that we just can't keep. Orium sniffed again. Why did it turn out like this? Why couldn't he have come back in one piece? Why did he die? I don't know, Lelouch answered. I know how much you loved him and I share in your grief, Inu-san. He was a good man. He was a brave man and he died bravely. He gave hope to Japan and he will live on in our hearts. As the duo sat there grieving the loss of Japan's tragic hero, the mysterious hooded Soul Reaper watched from afar. She's in your hands now, Lelouch. Take good care of her. Forgive me, Orium. He then took off. After Orium finally calmed down, Lelouch began to leave to return to his group. However, she followed him when she realized she was walking away. Lamperouge-kun, wait. She then tripped over a broken piece of concrete. Wah-wah-wah-wah-eh. She fell over. Her breasts acted as a cushion and softened the blow. A-tet-a-tet-tet, she groaned as she got up off the ground and dusted herself off. Lelich looked back. After helping her calm down, the squad captain thought that Orium might go home or at the very least check into a therapy clinic. She certainly needed one. What's the trouble? Lelich asked. I had something to ask you. There's something that even my mental instability can't explain. Go on, Lelich narrowed his gaze. You were right. I was supposed to blow up in that beret. Orium removed her headband. Look, no hairpins. I don't have my powers, Lamperouge-kun. Someone saved me and dragged me far away. There was a small pause. Lelich waited for Orium to speak again. Lamperouge-kun, tell me, have you seen a mysterious hooded Soul Reaper wandering about? Lelich stared back at Orium. You've seen him too. After Kendra had told him that the 12th Division had not picked up any anomalous signals, he had started to believe her words after the incident with Yuffie about it all being in his mind, at least until now anyway. Now he knew such was not the case. Orium had seen him too. What does it mean? Lelich asked himself. Soul Society. Nemu finally shut off the monitor stream. That's all, she said. Wait. Renji complained. That's it? That's all that happened. Rukia complained as well. Well, that's all we got for now, Jin told her, rubbing his head. Why, what do you mean? What else ya got? Come on, I wanna see what happens next. Kenpeki exclaimed. Ever since Narita he'd really been enjoying the stream. Yeah, does Zero get his memory back? Come on, this can't be the end of it all. How could you just cut the power after Suzaku beat him down like that? What's gonna happen to Zero? Senna asked. We got a while to wait, Jin said. Next transmission don't come for another couple months. Rukia, Renji, Yachiru, Senna, and Rurokiyo were not happy. I believe I can provide intermission in the meantime, Yukatake said. Lelich did tell me a bit of where he placed the monitor flies for activation. Rukia, Renji, Senna, Rurokiyo, and Yachiru piled in front of him, looking up at him like they were kindergartners about to engage in story time. Everyone else just put their eyes on him, watching from afar to listen to what he had to say. After Lelich was escorted to Pendragon. Area 11. Back in the rubble of the Black Rebellion, Lelich and Orium looked at each other. So he is real, after all? What does it mean, Lamperouge-kun? I don't know, Lelich shook, but this is something we'll have to discover. He turned around. Come, you're part of the expedition now. Expedition? Orium questioned. You cannot return to the Black Knights and you have no home to return to. Arisawa told me that you all wish to observe me. So, come with me. At my side and with your help, I believe I can uncover the truth behind our mysterious follower. You think so? I know so, Lelich spoke with conviction. Orium smiled, thank you. When Ichigo died, Orium walked up alongside Lelich. I thought you had abandoned us. I thought you didn't care about us anymore, but when I saw Rangiku-san a part of me began to think differently. And then, her smile faded, when you helped me confront my feelings earlier, I realized that you really do care. Her eyes became wet and she tried not to break down again. All of you care? Of course we care, Lelich said with a smile, we always have. Orium sniffed and rubbed her eye. Sorry, I promised myself I was done crying. Never fight tears, Lelich told her calmly, they're the products of someone who is truly human. And so, Orium said nodding as she dried her eyes, that's why I'm thanking you because I know that I'm not alone. We weren't abandoned or forgotten, you really did care. Orium's words hit Lelich right where it didn't need to. Her words, her actions, Lelich almost saw a parallel to himself when he was alive between him and Orium. His hatred, his vengeance, almost all of the parallels fit. Lelich managed to resist breaking down into manic laughter at the ridiculous coincidence. He composed himself and cleared his throat and spoke to Orium with professional calmness and a neutral stare, Inu-san, I'm sorry. There's nothing for you to be sorry for, Orium said with a smile. It just feels like the right thing to say, Lelich said, hanging his head. After a pause he added. Inu-san, when I see my sister face to face and explain to her what went wrong and what I did and why I did it, do you think she'll forgive me? I can't imagine why she wouldn't. You're talking about Cornelia, right? Lelich nodded. She has a heart too, doesn't she? She loved her sister, Euphemia. Surely there is love in there for you as well. Lelich didn't realize it, but he was crying. Yeah, I suppose there is. Orion walked over to him and closed his head into her bosom. Take all the time you need to compose yourself, Lamperouge-kun. The others need you to be strong. A few days later. Viceroy Palace Medical Wing. Cornelia opened her eyes to the sight of Nonette and Guilford. Guilford was smiling, Nonette was ecstatic. Cornelia hurt all over. She had a head bandage wrapped around her forehead and some thick gauze pads along her left temple. Her left arm was all bandaged up and in a sling, and she had a needle injected into her right arm to keep her alive. Her hair was a mess. She was in a hospital gown. Guilford, Nonette. Yay. Nellie's awake. Nonette cheered. What happened? Did we win? Cornelia asked. Area 11 is safe and secure, Princess, Guilford told her. Cornelia smiled at Guilford. Thank you, Guilford. We lost, a lot of good men though. Guilford hung his head. Cornelia looked back forward. Darlton. I already spoke to Schneeisel, Nonette said, coming down to a serious level. Zero has been taken into custody and, for his capture, Kurugi Suzaku is going to be promoted to Knight of 7. I see. Cornelia leaned back and tilted her head up. And the Black Knights? A lot of them died in the battle, but we're working on rounding them up now. Schneeisel's taking care of that. He arrived not too long after the battle had ended. Miss Enneagram here had provided a magnificent substitute commander in your stead. Thank you, Nonette. Hey, that's what friends are for, Nonette smiled joyously. Unfortunately your Gloucester couldn't be salvaged, Guilford told Cornelia. What about the Kyoto group? Gone into hiding, I'm afraid. We captured Teizo, but he won't talk. So that's it, huh? It's over. Cornelia closed her eyes. Guilford, Nonette, I want some time alone. I have a lot to think about. Yes, my lady. If you need anything, just shout. Guilford exited first and Nonette soon followed. The echo of the door being closed on her echoed rather loudly in Cornelia's head, and then the gears inside her cranium felt like they had just been turned on. Cornelia was now left in the empty room with her thoughts. So, what now? I should probably go look for Nunnally, but, no, Yuffie comes first. But, she bit down, curled her lip, I can't do that in my position, neither as viceroy, nor as a military commander. Cornelia sighed. Why does it even matter anymore? She pondered the subject for a minute, the ticking of the clock making the only noise in the room. She finally came to a conclusion. It doesn't matter anymore. Yuffie's dead, Lelich is captured, possibly going to be executed. Cornelia sighed. Perhaps it's best, if I just leave the Empire behind. In the days that passed, Zero was declared dead. However, when Cornelia went to go to Ashford Academy to acquire Nunnally and then later to go to the office at Tokyo Tower to hand in her letter of resignation, she found not Nunnally, but Lelich at Ashford, and he was laughing and smiling and treating a complete stranger like a brother, as were those around him. Cornelia was completely confused. She approached the area. Students cluttered and chatted as she passed, making an advance towards Lelich and his friends. However, before she could get close enough, she was intercepted by Violet Inu. Viceroy. Violeta. Cornelia was completely confused. I'm glad I caught you before you did something rash. Cornelia folded her arms. And, care to explain to me, just what is so rash? She scowled. Violeta explained to her that Lelich's memory had been rewritten. She did not explain how or why and kept referring to him as Zero. Two of his most important accomplices got away from the rebellion, including the Gurren's pilot and this green-haired woman the Prime Minister has shown special interest in. Violeta showed Cornelia a picture of CC. And, Cornelia said, looking at the photograph, you're sure she's connected to Lelo, I mean Zero? Yes, Violeta nodded. I see. As you were, Professor Nu, Cornelia bit down on the last two words and began to walk away. So that's how it's going to be, father? Not even bothering to let me in on your plans for my brother? Well then, I don't need your empire, and I don't need your faith in me. The only thing that matters to me now is clearing Yuffie's name. I don't know what you've done with Nunnally, but I will find out, and by whatever driving force that controls this world, if I find that she has been harmed, father, you will suffer the consequences. Pendragon, lodging of the Knights of the Round. Suzaku was still getting used to the responsibility of being a Knight of the Round as well as all the clout it carried. Kurugi, relax. You've been walking around like you're afraid to break something for the past few days. Just chill, the Knight of Four, Dorothea Ernst told him. Dora's right, Suzaku, Nonette said from the couch and pat the cushion next to her. Come sit down, put your feet up, relax. Before Suzaku could even make a move though, Nonette's phone went off. She saw the caller ID and answered it promptly. Hey. Nelly. Huh? Guilford, what are you doing using Nelly's office phone? Suzaku, Dorothea, Bismarck, Gino, and Monica all looked in Nonette's direction with interest. The others didn't seem to care much about if the second Imperial Princess was dead, alive, or in good health. Suzaku watched though as Nonette, cheerful, smiling, Nonette, went from listening intently, to slightly unsettled, to apprehensive to complete and utter shock. She wouldn't have. I thought she would at least wait for me. Miss Enneagram, what's? Bismarck held his finger to his lip to indicate Suzaku to be quiet. Nonette now sounded depressed. Yes, I understand. I will tell His Majesty. She hung up. She looked at the others. That was General Guilford. Her ladyship, Princess Cornelia, has disappeared. The ones that had been paying attention had a look of shock upon their faces. From a recliner, Luciano Bradley laughed. What's the matter? Did the Viceroy finally have no guts for the taste of war? I bet she went and jumped somewhere. Without her precious little sister, Cornelia is. Nonette was already looming over Bradley with a dark aura emitting from her. Okay, not really, but the dark look in her eye would not have made such an aura out of place. She picked Bradley up, twirled him around, and belted him in the face with a right hook. He went staggering towards the window and then she leapt and kicked him through it. Bradley was able to react and grabbed the ledge connected to the floor. The windows in the room were single pane and as tall as the doors. Bradley hung on for dear life as he looked up at the enraged Knight of Nine. She stepped on his knuckles. Aoic. Bradley grunted from the pane. Please. Nonette, we're about a dozen stories up. If I fall from this height, I'll die. Please, help me up. What's the matter, little vampire? Nonette asked with a frigid, merciless tone. Where are your little wings to flap, 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 flap away? Her gaze narrowed. Please. I beg of you. Have mercy. It was amazing to see the vampire of Britannia brought to his knees when his own life was threatened so thoroughly. He didn't smugly question Nonette's desire to want to off him. There were 3 personal rules amongst the Knights of the Round that went as follows. Rule number 1, in the Knights of the Round, don't fuck with the Knight of Nine. Rule number 2, if you're stupid enough to break rule number 1, don't question her resolve to kill you. Rule number 3, if you are dense enough to break rule number 2, don't be surprised when you soon find your pelvis in the same vicinity as your jaw. Suzaku took a step forward. Miss Enneagram, whatever happened to the Viceroy? Is it worth killing a comrade over? I'd hate to think so. Luciano Bradley had nothing to do with it, so help him up. Everyone, save Anya, stared at the Knight of Seven with fear in their eyes like he had a death wish. No one had been so bold as to dare to stand up to Nonette when she was like this, not even Bismarck. You were liable to meet the same fate as everyone else she was currently taking her anger out on. Nonette marched towards Suzaku and stared at him in the eyes with her coldest and darkest stare. Suzaku refused to blink and stared right back with a glare of his own. Then, wordlessly, Nonette turned away from Suzaku, grabbed Bradley just as his grip slipped from the edge and whipped him towards the couch she was just sitting at, taking a swift kick to the side of his face before his momentum had picked up too much speed. She knocked out 3 of his teeth in the process. Bradley's face impacted against the back of the couch cushion. T2 cool, Monica stared at Suzaku. No one had ever stared down Nonet before like that and come out of it unscathed. Anyway, Nonet, what were you saying before the Knight of 10 interrupted? Nonet breathed deep and explained. Guilford read a note that Nellie left behind. She disappeared, all on her own. Nonet looked like she might cry. What? What do you mean? Suzaku asked. Nellie, Nonet stood still in shock, has left the Empire of Britannia. Even Bismarck was concerned by this prospect. Her Majesty did what? Suzaku asked. I thought I said it pretty clear, Nonet glared. Don't make me repeat myself. But, why would Princess Cornelia leave the Empire? Dorothea questioned. For Yuffie, Suzaku stated. What? Princess Euphemia? Bismarck questioned. She wants to clear Yuffie's name. She, and neither do I, believe that Yuffie is capable of such atrocious behavior as the SAZ. Suzaku was asked to keep quiet about Geese by Charles. He was told it should not be leaked publicly. However, I wish she had contacted me first. I have light to share on the subject for her ears only. Miss Enneagram, if you hear anything at all from Her Majesty, tell her I want to speak to her about Yuffie. Nonet nodded and then she smiled. Thank you, Suzaku. For an honorary Brightonian you're not half bad, Dorothea smirked, pressing the side of her index finger underneath her lip. Thanks, Suzaku rubbed the back of his head, finding it hard to accept praise. Nonet walked over and pushed Suzaku's face straight into her bosom. His face turned red as an apple. He flung himself apart from Nonet. What the hell was that for? Suzaku freaked out. Nonet laughed heartily. Oh Suzaku, lighten up. You're far too uptight. Seriously, relax. You're a knight of the round. But I. Nonet slung her arm around Suzaku's shoulders and looked to the side to look him in the eye. Hey. We all do things we're not proud of. Dorothea herself has a pretty sad history if she cares to share it with you. Suzaku still didn't seem like he really fit with the group. With that, Nonet then shoved Suzaku forward and he knocked into the side table, which caused the vase on top of it to wobble, fall off and break. What the heck was that for? It was a friendly tap on the shoulder. Nonet didn't see what Suzaku's problem was. You broke a vase. Suzaku exclaimed. And? Do you see anyone getting upset about it? It's just a stupid vase. Nonet said, like breaking an antique $50,000 was no big deal. Suzaku blinked. Nonet was one of the strangest people he'd ever met. He watched as Nonet then picked up the newspaper sitting on the table. Here. I've already read the paper, Suzaku barked. I know, but I want you to toss it into the air and scatter the pages, Nonet told him. Why? Suzaku couldn't for the life of him understand the tall woman in front of him. Just do it. It'll be fun. Make a mess. Nonet seemed eager to see Suzaku do something. He was hesitant at first, but with all the tense air around him, Suzaku was worried how awkward things would start to get if he didn't do something. He grabbed the paper out of Nonet's hands and began doing as Nonet suggested. As the recycled wood fell all around him, he noticed that everyone around him, save for Anya who didn't smile and Bradley, who was still giving the cushion a face high five, was smiling. He then realized what Nonet had been trying to do. He smiled as well. Welcome to the family, she told him. Suzaku got a little teary-eyed. Thank you, he said to her. Area 11. Although her arm had yet to fully heal, Cornelia didn't care. She was on the move and she didn't know to where. She would find the truth behind Yuffie's actions. She would find the truth behind Lelich's change. She would find the truth behind the death of Lady Marianne. I have nothing worth fighting for the Empire for, Cornelia scowled. Everything I do now is for personal gain. I will find the answers I seek. Cornelia realized she was at the edge of the Tokyo settlement. High above the ground, the mysterious hooded Soul Reaper saw what had become of Zero and what was going on around him. He lost, his memory was wiped. How did he get it back? And what did he do that caused him die? Euphemia, what happened to you? Cornelia thought to herself. I will continue to watch over you, Lelich. I will hunt down any lead I can and clear your name, Euphemia. I will pursue the truth. To be continued. Chapter 165, Tatsuki's Rampage, Breaking Point. 2017 ATB, October. After escaping Common Island, Colin had a lot of thinking to do on her own. Her head swirled about in confusion. She didn't know what was real anymore. After Zero turned out to be a classmate of hers she despised, Colin didn't know if what had occurred with the Black Knights was all real or just an illusion. The worst part was that Colin couldn't return home. She couldn't resume her normal life with her normal friends with her normal routine. She had made her stance clear as one of the Black Knights. It didn't matter to Colin. She was Japanese and therefore it was the ghettos in which she belonged. After a month, the Brightonians stopped combing over Area 11 so thoroughly and searched for the remaining Black Knights by interrogating the ones they had already captured. Most of this was due to Cornelia's abandonment and the country being in disarray as it searched for a new general-in-chief, but at the moment none had been decided upon. After raiding an abandoned retail store in one of the ghettos, Colin got herself a motorcycle outfit, complete with helmet and a ride with which to travel upon. After stopping nearby, Colin wandered into a Brightonian government building in order to see who had been captured, who had been executed and who had been slain. She left her helmet on so that no one would see her face. The people around her didn't seem to care and security would only bag her if she did something suspicious. She stood along the wall looking at the electronic display of the members of the Black Knights. Each one was photographed through digital modification by means of taking any visualization known by the Brightonians and creating a mug shot from that model. It was the only way Colin could explain some of the members had been thrown upon the wall that were listed as being executed and, to her knowledge, were ghetto civilians that had joined the Black Knights to fight Japan, individuals of which had little to no record in the Brightonian system. However, as she scanned over the wall, only a few names mattered to her. The names ran alphabetically vertically up and down in descending order with the next name up at the top of the next column rather than going horizontally from left to right, so it was O guy's name Colin landed upon first as she scanned from left to right. Captured. That was the status listed. Okay, so he's still alive at least. Her own image was listed under her Stadfeld name, which disgusted her. She was Japanese, not Brightonian. CC was listed as being a trio of question marks. Her real name was not known, supposedly, but her picture made her stand out enough from a crowd well enough. Both women were considered to be still at large. Although there were factions in the military that knew CC's name, her identity was kept secret on a need-to-know basis. And then, she scanned up and down the column for the founding members of the Black Knights. Yashida was dead. Minami was at large. Tamaki and Kent were captured. Please be alright, please be alright. Inu Naomi. Executed. Colin gasped lowly. Big Blue, no. Colin felt like she might cry, but she held it in and just clenched her fist staring at the ground. Damn it, Big Blue, why? It's not fair. Colin then walked out of the office building and drove her motorbike to one of the ghettos. From there all that awaited her was a long walk of misery and shame as she held her helmet down at her side and walked like she was heading towards a guillotine or a noose. It was over. There was no reason for her to do much of anything anymore. Zero had been declared dead, her only true friend in world was dead and the rest of her friends were all Brightonian hostages. Colin figured there was nothing left for her in this world. At least, until her cell phone went off. Hello. Colin made sure to answer in Brightonian. Colin-chan, is that you? The voice was Indian accented Japanese. Rakshita. Colin stuttered. Ah, I knew you remembered me, Rakshata continued to talk in Japanese. How did you get this number? Oh, I just got it from my son of course. Your son? Colin was confused. My baby, the Gurren MK2, Rakshata told her. You added your cell phone number to its onboard calling feature, remember? I have access to that data outside the frame. What do you want anyway? Colin said in a calm, but irritated tone, do you want me to return the Gurren MK2 to you? You can have it. Oh, I don't want it back. Keep it, Rakshata told her. Huh. Colin was confused. What use could she possibly have for a giant mech that she had hidden in a remote location? Diet Hard believes that Zero isn't gone, that perhaps he's just lying low, and that this is all a part of his grand master plan. Colin spat, not a chance. Oh my, what's with you? I thought you'd be happy. You were Zero's biggest fan. Not anymore, Colin said sourly. Rax Hata sighed, maybe I should give the phone to someone else. She's recuperating, but she's well enough to speak. Colin heard shuffling in the background. Colin. Colin gasped. See. Colin, he's alive. And? So what? Colin snapped. I no longer care about any of that anymore. So you're saying, you don't care about your country? Colin just growled. I'll save Britannia my way. Zero doesn't matter. Colin, listen to me. Colin couldn't tell from audio only why CC sounded like she was in so much pain. Zero and I have a contract. I am supposed to help him overthrow the Britannian Emperor. And? What is he supposed to do for you? Colin inquired, still keeping her irritated tone. Her curious mind was overpowering her instinct to hang up and toss her phone away. Colin, Zero needs you. CC completely ignored Colin's question. Like hell. Colin snapped. He didn't care at all. Didn't care about any of us. He deceived us all. Deception was necessary. Would you have followed him otherwise? Colin's heart felt heavy. If she had known who Zero was right from the start, chances were she never would have followed him at all or took him seriously. Colin, there is a lot I need to explain to you. Please go and pilot the Gurren. Rax Hata will transmit a rendezvous point over a secure channel. Please come and see me. Give me one good reason. I don't have to. I know you'll come. The phone line then went dead. Colin hated how smug CC sounded and growled in frustration. She was right though. Colin hated it when she was right. Colin was too curious not to pass this up. She went to go get the Gurren where she had secretly docked it, and then she went to where Rax Hata was transmitting her location, which turned out to be the Black Knight's submarine out in the middle of the ocean. Well, hello there, Rax Hata said, upon Colin getting out of the Gurren once she had secured herself in the docking bay. We've been waiting for you. Where's CC? Colin asked, not wanting to beat around the bush. Right this way, follow me. Rax Hata brought Colin to the medical ward. CC was lying in bed with a large gauze pad over her left eye and was wrapped in bandages with the blanket only coming up to her stomach. Her entire body was covered in bandages, a lot of which were bleeding with fresh blood. She's still recovering. We thought she was dead when we first found her, half her body was missing and there was blood everywhere. She's quite an enigma, that one. What the hell? She recovered from missing half her body. Colin shouted, flabbergasted. That sounded to her like complete and utter ridiculousness. I am immortal, CC stated. Colin looked confused. Well, it's the only explanation that makes sense to me. We, that is to say Diet Hard, Sayoko, and I, haven't shared this with any of the others. We told the others she was simply heavily wounded in battle. By the time we started recovering members, she had already recovered her entire body. We bandaged her up when we noticed. I'd be lying if I didn't say the three of us weren't very shocked by all of this and that it didn't baffle or destroy everything I knew about modern medicine in the slightest. When we first found her, her small intestine wasn't even full repaired and hanging out beneath her stomach with the rest of her lower body completely missing. Still, strange as it is, you can't deny what is before your eyes. We've tried questioning her, but CC wouldn't say anything though about it besides what she just said. However, she said that you deserved to know the truth. Colin looked at how much CC was patched up. Only her hair, her right eye and her jaw were not bandaged over. Everything else had several layers of bandage tape over it with varying levels of redness where there was so much bleeding and tissue regeneration occurring. I almost couldn't believe my eyes when she went from not having a stomach to having a full body after a few short days. Sayoko wanted to give her a proper burial, which is why we kept her body. I see, Colin stated, still trying to wrap her head around the whole thing. I'll leave you two alone now, Rakshata then closed the door behind her and left the room. Colin pulled up a chair and sat next to Cece's bedside. The clock in the room ticked away, it being the only sound that could be heard for about quarter of a minute. Colin looked at Cece again. She has to be in so much pain, and yet she's not making a sound. She must have a remarkably strong will, or she's been hurt even worse before. I can't even imagine what kind of traumas she must have been through in her life. What Cece said struck her mind again. Immortal, huh? I wonder for just how long she's lived. Colin, Cece spoke her name. Yes. I believe it's time I told you about the true nature of Zero. The reason behind his existence and what exactly caused all of this. Why do I deserve to be told? I believe it to be necessary, if we are to bring Zero back. Besides, you've seen his face. How do you know that? Does anyone else know? No one else knows. Colin found it rather irritating how this was the second time Cece hadn't even acknowledged that she had asked a question, but Colin was willing to let her stay enigmatic as long as Cece kept her promise. Tell me about Zero, Colin said, I'm all ears. 2 weeks later. Tatsuki, Urayu, Chad, and Kigo decided that had to be it. They decided they should round up Orium, meet at Urahara's, and pick up where they left off, Ichigo or no. Things seemed to be going according to plan until the list of the Black Knights, along with status, executed, wanted, or in custody, was made public. That morning, Tatsuki, dressed in her hooded get-up to avoid drawing attention to herself, ordered a cup of coffee and a scone and borrowed one of the laptops. She pulled up a chair to an empty table, with the scone dangling from her mouth, sat down and went to the internet to open the list. She began sifting through it completely out of curiosity, having almost forgotten Orium was a part of Knights. And then she spied it, Orium's new look with the alias, Inu Naomi, and the status executed written underneath. The scone dropped from her mouth onto the table. If Tatsuki's spiritual power could have influenced her coffee, she would have turned it into a block of ice to absorb its heat given how cold she felt inside. Her eyes shook and trembled back and forth. It couldn't be true. It absolutely could not be true. However, no matter how much she blinked, no matter how much she hit F5 to refresh the page, the status wouldn't change. Or, hi, me. And then, something within Tatsuki snapped. A resonant pulse emitted from within Tatsuki. She was giving into every last ounce of hatred she had. Her family was dead. Ichigo was dead. Orium was dead. Just as Cornelia had fallen to despair when she had nothing left, Tatsuki was reaching the same level. However, rather than hitting despair, Tatsuki went straight to anger. Although she and Kaibun had long since come to an understanding, anger was still a huge factor in just how much support, pull or influence Kaibun had on Tatsuki's powers. Tatsuki stood up and bent over backwards as she let out a furious scream, burning away her top layer of clothing and igniting everything around her in a pillar of flame, destroying the whole cafe. Brighton neons began freaking out and running. A civilian dialed the emergency number for the fire department. Some citizens got a good look at Tatsuki and began shouting out, "It's Noble Dragon." The legends were true. Much like Orium, Tatsuki had hit her breaking point. As she walked out of the burning building and into the streets, she shouted, "I'm going to do what I should have done the moment my strength was restored. Britannia is dead." Tatsuki was still at 1/5 her power, since her limiter had not been removed, but even then only a Soul Reaper captain with Bankai under Gentei Kaijo or stronger had any hope of stopping her. "Stop right there!" A few cops ran up to Tatsuki, her whole body surrounded in a bright flaming aura, and began firing at her on instinct. The bullets turned to ash before they even reached her. With a fireball, Tatsuki incinerated the cops. Saigo no Kataki no Ryu. Tatsuki entered her final form and took to the skies. A news helicopter was flying overhead. She destroyed it without a second thought. "You took my home," she said, her voice echoing alongside Kaibun's, "now I rescind your lives." Drawing back her hands and gathering energy, Tatsuki let loose a stream of flames, setting the area below her on fire. Bodies burned, civilians died, and she didn't care. She was done with caring. She began flying east towards the edge of the country, soon pursued by enemy aircrafts and nightmare frames. None of them lasted for more than a second before Tatsuki had ripped them apart and melted them down. Within the Viceroy Palace, Guilford was panicking. A new Viceroy hadn't even been put in charge of the area yet and already things were going to hell. Lelich and Orium would later find out about this catastrophe, but by that point the damage Tatsuki was committing would be done. Because Lelich could feel himself in no danger of fading, it meant that fate had only failure in mind for Tatsuki, but the cause of that fate was unknown and the fate itself unknown to the woman herself. As she reached the Pacific she tore across the water, splitting the sea into separate ripples as her flight speed increased until finally a Mach cone formed around her body. "Oto no," Tatsuki said with the double echo again, "Hono." Sonic blaze, blasting straight through the sound barrier, Tatsuki fried all fish swimming less than 200 feet beneath the surface caused by the heat generated by her sonic boom, and as she tore towards Britannia her speed kept rising and rising, her anger driving to speeds far beyond her body's usual limits. 700 meters per second, 1,100 meters per second, 1,400 meters, and it showed no signs of stopping. When she arrived on the west coast her speed had reached 3,500 meters per second, somewhat about Mach 10, and she kept going straight for the capital. It had taken her 1 to 3 hours to reach the west coast and less than a tenth of that to reach the capital. By the time she had arrived, Charles was well prepared for her arrival. The Knights of the Round were deployed against her. As their Knight Marrays were not as efficient as the Lancelot, production was underway though, the warrior had pulled them apart within mere minutes. The only warrior standing in her way was the Lancelot itself, as it used its float system to stand before her. "Cease and desist at once," Suzaku shouted at her. "It's not too late to stuff it," Tatsuki shouted, and with the speed of a warhead plowed straight into the Lancelot, cleaving it completely in half at the center point. There was a minor explosion caused by the damage to the energy filler, but the legs of the Lancelot and the torso went cleanly falling towards the ground. Suzaku smashed around in the cockpit from impact, taking serious injury. He'd live, and he was damn lucky not to have broken any bones. The Geese command on him had done that for the most part, but he was in serious pain and he needed to quickly get out of his nightmare to protect Charles. Lloyd saw this from the Lancelot's launch point and felt like he wanted to crumple into a ball as if he had felt the pounding the Lancelot had received. Damage like that would take months to fix. "My Lancelot!" he shouted in anguish as he clamped his hands to his cranium and tilted his head towards the ceiling while spinning 180 degrees. Tatsuki made a beeline for the Emperor's palace and carved up the soldiers, tanks, and what remained of the Empire's last line of defense with just an inferno emitting from her hands. Even the AA guns fell before her. She was completely unstoppable, hatred in her serpentine, yellow eyes as she blasted through the front door and made her way towards Charles's throne room. What she didn't realize was how much energy she had been burning away, and that would make all the difference in her confrontation with the Emperor. His last line of defense fell before her with ease, turned to naught but cinders, as if she was a raging hell demon. "I did it," Tatsuki panted, catching her breath. "We should have done this from the start." Protecting Karakura town, she spat and pointed at Charles. "We should have gone straight for you." Charles spoke in Japanese to her. "You really think you can kill me? Watch me." With a furious charge, Tatsuki rushed up and cracked His Majesty right across the face with a fearsome left hook, sending him spiraling off the throne and crashing to the ground. Charles stood up and dusted himself. Tatsuki had inflicted a minor burn and drew blood, but that was all the damage she had inflicted. Tatsuki was certain she'd punched with enough force to take Charles's head clean off. She didn't care and prepared to strike again. Charles stood his ground, not the least bit bothered from the wound on his face. "I have known about your kind for longer than you have been alive. You utilize your inner energy and manifest it through your pride. What would you know about pride?" Tatsuki spat, and then with a fierce cry she struck forward again, but Charles avoided her strike as he dodged to the left, a greenish light following his footsteps. She recognized the movement. "Bring her light?" Charles pulled a pistol on her and fired. Tatsuki dodged out the way as the bullet lodged into the wall and exploded, creating a hole in the wall allowing her to see into the foundation of the palace. "Sakuradite ammo? You are strong." 11. Charles spoke to Tatsuki, keeping his gun trained on her. "You are one of the fabled Karakura 7, aren't you?" "If I am, What's it to you? Tatsuki asked, taking a stance. You lost 2 of your comrades in arms in that clash. I have a proposition that might interest you. By 2, Charles was referring to Ichigo and Yoshino. He had no idea of Orium supposedly being dead or that Tatsuki had lost her parents to the SAZ. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying, Tatsuki glared. Just hear my proposition, Miss Noble Dragon. If you don't like my proposition you can go back to attempting to kill me. Make your offer. Tatsuki didn't lower her guard for a moment. She didn't see the problem in humoring Charles. She could sense his ryotsu. It paled in comparison to hers for the most part. I am in the midst of attempting to overthrow God with a mighty power called the Sword of Akasha. I can create a world without lies, a world of perfection. If this world is created it will be reborn, the dead will rejoin the living. What's the catch? Charles's proposition sounded too good to be true. There is no catch. All you have to do is add your power to my cause, Miss Noble Dragon. Charles extended his hand to Tatsuki. Will you join me? If Charles were a racist like his daughter he would have never allowed Suzaku to be a member of the Knights of the Round. Even the Knight of 4 was an honorary Brighton, a former citizen of the EU from Egypt. Charles just always simply believed in his one moral: all men are not created equal. If he could convince Tatsuki, a true and tried Japanese, to toss away her patriotism for the cause of slaying God, he could use her to crush the pride of the Japanese once and for all. Tatsuki smirked. Are you for real? She chuckled. You killed my friends. Do you honestly think I would ever join the likes of you? Even with what I have promised, you would still turn down my offer. Charles scowled. All men are not created equal. You are far superior to many men and women. Will you not use that power to slay the God that has robbed you of your comrades? Think of what you could do with such strength. Even a man as mighty as Charles could not comprehend or understand Tatsuki's origins. All he cared about was manipulating her into joining him to utilize this magnificent power before him, the power of the dragon. There's such a thing as death with meaning. And if I kill you, then their deaths will not have been in vain, Tatsuki said, charging her fist with flame. Charles remained ever vigilant, standing before her. He scowled. So much for negotiations. I am truly disappointed. I thought someone of your skill and talent would be a powerful asset to the project, but I guess once a dog, always a dog. If I'm a dog, Tatsuki leapt from her feet, then you're dog food. Kaso Kabushi. She threw her punch, but was surprised when Charles put up his hand and Tatsuki was repelled almost an entire decimeter from his glove. What? My clothes all have traces of sekiseki in them, your weakness. After the Karakura 7 news reached my desk, I thought one of you might try to take vengeance upon me, so I prepared myself for this very day. You cannot defeat me, Miss Noble Dragon. You don't have the experience or the proper skill. You bastard, how can you possibly even know what sekiseki is? Britannia owns a noble house in a place called the Soul Society. Charles had no idea what Tatsuki knew, so he couldn't assume she knew anything about the afterlife. With the Ragnarok connection, which I used to create the Sword of Akasha, I can talk to my deceased relatives and can ask questions. They're all very forthcoming with information for me. Ever since the defeat of a man named Aizen, they have all been very forthcoming in wanting revenge on C. Tatsuki grit her teeth in hate. I will kill you. Go ahead and try it. You will fail. I assure you. Tatsuki pushed away from Charles, stopping her strike, and launched her body at him again with assault after assault, but with the energy she had already spent and the seal weighing down her power unknowingly, Tatsuki wasn't fast enough to get past Charles's reflexes and take a good shot at his head, the only part not protected by sekiseki. With his protective clothes he blocked every last punch Tatsuki threw at him. Kyoyoba. With a blazing kick Tatsuki took a high swing at Charles's head, but he dodged and was now behind her and fired with a Sakuradite bullet. Keshitsudama. The large ball of flame blasted towards Charles and consumed the bullet, but the explosion sent Tatsuki flying and into the wall, whereas Charles's clothing kept him from getting hurt even by her massive fireball. As Tatsuki hit the floor and prepared to get up, Charles bellowed, "Emperor's command." With a lift of his hand, Tatsuki watched as the floor began to shoot up in pillars as she ducked and weaved around it. The walls shot out towards like pistons in a machine. What the dash? Charles turned his hand over and pushed down. The entire room seemed to come alive and attack Tatsuki with everything trying to grab or kill her. Before she knew it, she was bound in place on the ground by the Emperor's carpet, strangled by the power of Charles's Ryotsu. She hadn't the strength to break free. Her Ryotsu alone couldn't burn through it. You bastard! What's going on here? My full bring, the power of the pride in my country. With it, every material inanimate object is mine to command using my spiritual power. You are the first to witness my power in more than 50 years. I don't get to use it very often on others or let other people see it. Consider yourself honored and privileged. Charles's eye suddenly glowed. Geese? And no. Whatever you are going to tell me to do, I won't do it. Tatsuki shouted in frantic fear. So you know about the power of geese? Charles was slightly amused. It seems, though, that you are somewhat misinformed. The geese you talk about is the geese of absolute obedience, so it means you know Lelich. How unfortunate for you, Miss Noble Dragon. Stop, what are you going to do to me? Tatsuki asked as she felt Charles's presence in her mind. Stop it. Stop it. She cried out frantically. Get out of my head. She could feel her mind going numb until she couldn't bear it anymore and her mind just went blank. It was at this point that a new figure entered the stage, this one from beneath the floor, from the gates of hell themselves. It was the mysterious hooded Soul Reaper. Who are you? Charles asked. His grasp on Tatsuki lost as eye contact was broken. The ghost of Christmas future, the Soul Reaper remarked. That's some mouth you've got. Charles activated his geese only to find himself with no target. He scowled a little. Like with most geeses, you need direct eye contact, don't you? As his face was covered completely with shadow, Charles could not see the eyes of this newcomer. The mysterious hooded Soul Reaper then freed Tatsuki as he waved his hand over the carpet, peeling Charles's Ryotsu off her through mere Ryotsu control. Without even drawing his weapon, or even touching the material. The Soul Reaper picked Tatsuki up and held her underneath his arm. If she was at full power, you would have been dead. If it were up to me, you'd be dead. Tough talk, Charles snapped, I've just about had it with your kind and underestimating me. Charles fired off his gun. The mysterious hooded Soul Reaper, at point-blank range, whipped out his sword and sliced the bullet in half, sending the halves to opposite sides of the room, detonating on impact. Impossible. For one time in his life since becoming emperor, Charles felt true fear. His reflexes, what is this man? How is he so powerful? He's not even using a tenth of what he is truly capable of. The hooded figure put his blade away and walked to exit the throne room. I'd kill you myself, but Judgment Day will come for you soon enough. Ha! And by whose hand? Charles asked, starting to become stir-crazed. Zero has been dealt with. Are you saying another entity rises up to stop me? Zero will rise again. Of that you can be certain. Utter foolishness. Charles bellowed. We shall see. The Soul Reaper then left Charles as he exited the palace, taking Tatsuki with him and entering a hell gate that appeared in midair. Your Majesty. Suzaku came running into the palace hall, clutching his mangled arm and on woozy legs with blood trickling from his forehead. He saw the ash and smelled the stench of death. I'm all right, Kurugi Suzaku, Charles spoke in Suzaku's native tongue, is there something urgent? Sir, what happened to the intruder? She was captured by a mysterious entity who took her with him. He was not hostile towards me, so I let him go. Charles would never admit that he could be dead right about now. She has already been dealt with though. My hold on her was broken before I could finish rewriting her memory. If she even regains her mind, she'll be naught but an empty shell, nor have the power to try again. Zero will rise again. Of that you can be certain. The ghost of Christmas future. Charles decided to take the mysterious entity's words to heart. Just in case there was some truth to what he was saying. Charles believed in a world without lies, and his insecurity of even the chance that Zero could rise again made him edgy. Also, it meant that CC would attempt to make contact with Zero, something he needed to happen. Suzaku, do me a favor. Anything, Your Majesty. I live to serve you. Suzaku knelt down on one knee. Contact Japan and monitor Lelich. But Sir, Rollo and Violet Inu are already. I am not content with letting two single Brighton Neons carry out such an order. Get some professionals to monitor Lelich. That's an order. Yes, sir. Suzaku leapt to his feet in salute. Hell, Rita's abode. With healing Kido, Rita healed Tatsuki as best she could with regards to the Foolbringer's mind. How is she? The mysterious hooded Soul Reaper asked. It's like she will recover. She has a remarkably strong willpower. However, you should take her out of here before she reawakens. Her memory has been shattered. It's hard to say how she will perceive reality once she wakes up. The mysterious hooded Soul Reaper sighed. I understand. Area 11. Emerging from hell, the mysterious hooded Soul Reaper emerged at a remote location, chosen by Rita. It was in front of a small clinic in northeastern Area 11, a house owned by an honorary Brighton Neon, Kurosaki Ishine. The Herald of Hell's warden set Tatsuki down at the doorstep. You will be safe here. I am sorry for waiting, but the same risk cannot be taken twice. Forgive me, Tatsuki. He then left in an instant after ringing the doorbell. Coming. Ishine's gruff voice sounded from inside. He opened the door to see Tatsuki's unconscious form on the ground. Arisawa Tatsuki? What's she doing here? Ishine poked his head out and walked out onto his front lawn. Hello? Anyone out there? Who brought this woman to my doorstep? Ishine sighed. He hoisted Tatsuki onto his back. Come on, he grunted as he helped her inside. Even if he's no longer around, my son would kill me if I left you out in the cold like that. I don't know who brought you here, or why, but they were right to do so. I'm probably the closest thing you have to a family now. Ishine opened the door to the clinic he had established in his new home and set Tatsuki down on one of the beds. He put a cold pack on her head and let her rest. He then went out to the fridge and opened a can of Pepsi before reheating some pizza and sitting down on his couch to watch the news. He saw the report on Tatsuki's rampage through Britannia and Area 11. Cover-up was being set underway, of course, with the media explaining the return of Noble Dragon as the delusions of traumatized civilians. He smirked. Heh, so that's why. He looked back at his clinic's door. Well, you're safe here, Tatsuki. Ishine looked at the TV. I've got no connection to the spiritually attuned, he flexed his hand, haven't been for almost more than a decade and a half now. So you rest and get your strength back. You can rest here as long as you'd like. In Tatsuki's mind, Arisa and Kaibun were conversing. Her connection to us is blocked, Arisa stated. Yes, Kaibun noted, her power is sealed up inside her. As is her memory. Should we forcefully break it? No, it's better to let her stay like this for now, we should preserve her. Yes, that does seem the most logical solution. Kaibun looked down, Tatsuki. She will come back to us, Kaibun. We are her. We will be here when she decides to truly wake up. Yes, the geese erased her memory, but not her soul. As long as her soul is undamaged, we will always be here. For now we wait until the day comes when the noble dragon rises again, like a phoenix from the ashes. Yes, Kaibun agreed. On her back, Tatsuki slept soundly, a peaceful sleep took hold of her and she would not awake until the next day, her sleep like that of a normal humans. End of chapter 165. Check the description for the links to the author.